Chapter 81 Leaving the Dome by Hydesgrain. Jason was only at the 6th novice rank. As such, 2 stages meant he would have to defeat low awakened beasts as his assignment, which made him somewhat happy. It was not because Jason was confident in defeating them in a head-on fight, or even while assassinating. Rather, it was because low awakened beasts were all over the 2 star zones around Syro City, and there was almost no end to their sheer number. 2 hours passed and a drone arrived in front of the school gates with a parcel below it, and Jason accepted it with his signature. Afterward, he called a shuttle, and only 90 minutes later, Jason stood in front of the dome's border, wearing his Grade 2 garment, the mechanical knife holder on the back, his bow in one hand, the quiver around him, and a belt with 3 yellow-green regents within them. Inside his parcel, he ordered previously, were 2 different kinds of items that used up most of his remaining savings. A dozen arrows with a small hole in the arrowhead and small capsules beside them, fitting inside perfectly. These capsules could be sealed with mana for a certain period of time before the seal would be released. The price for these arrows with the specially manufactured capsules beside were already expensive, with a price of 150,000 credits, because the capsules were made out of a rare kind of dissolving material when injected with mana. However, the most expensive purchase were the 3 reagents hanging on his belt. The 3 reagents that were priced are around 120,000 credits each. Inside these reagents was some kind of enhanced and extracted venom from various types of plant and beasts. It could almost instantly kill all kinds of wild ranked beasts and would only need around 20 seconds to traverse through the body of an awakened beast. Even late awakened beasts would be easily killed, and it was said that this kind of potion could also kill evolved ranked beasts with enough time passing, as long as they entered their blood circulation. But the forte of this potion was its paralyzing effect rather than its lethal venom. Every beast at and below the low unblemished rank wouldn't be able to control its body, not feeling anything at all. All kinds of senses would be disrupted, and there was not a single thing one could do, once paralyzed. This numbness would stay for 5 minutes for low-evolved ranked beasts and would kill all beasts below this rank easily, while mid-evolved beasts had a small chance to survive the paralyzation with their high life force, only to die at the lethal poison. Right now, Jason was calmly filling the dissolving capsules with the reagents. After having filled 12 of them, all of his reagents were used up, with 360,000 credits vanishing into thin air. Sealing them with his mana would use up some of his stored mana, but it was fine, as he placed the sealed capsules inside the arrowheads. After the capsules were safely packed into the arrowheads, Jason stored them inside his quiver with a mana stone on the bottom of the quiver in order to supply the capsules with mana to prevent any kinds of accidents. With 12 arrows, Jason knew that he was only allowed to miss 2 shots, which was somewhat thrilling. However, during the last 2 weeks, his archery skills improved quite a lot, even on moving targets, thanks to his arduous training and effort. His auntie gave him a membership card to the archery hall nearby, and there were many kinds of unmoving and moving targets with certain missions to solve. It was like a game, and the first level was easy. With a single target, he had to hit within a range of 30 meters. While Jason continued playing through the game, the missions were getting more difficult with each level. It was only when he failed to hit fast-moving targets that Jason had to stop to read the foundational archery guide with all kinds of information written inside. Furthermore, with the membership card he got, Jason could also ask the instructors working there for tips, and they helped him to fix his flaws by telling him what he made wrong with small but efficient instructions. This caused Jason's archery to reach a better mastery, and somehow, he had already reached the advanced adept levels with illusional beast targets with their speed almost comparable to evolved ranked beasts. In the end, it was only because of his exceptional eyesight, which made everything possible. The strength of his bow was way too weak to kill or even penetrate the hide of evolved ranked beasts, and Jason wouldn't be able to pull stronger bows with his strength for now. This meant he was stuck at the advanced adept level for good without being able to advance further. Hitting awakened ranked beasts with his archery skill shouldn't be a problem, and Jason was confident in receiving a premium reward. After Jason finished his preparations, he walked confidently through the dome, where he was instantly invaded by an overwhelming amount of mana. Jason knew this would happen because it was always like that when he left the dome, but the sheer amount of mana almost forced him onto his knees. He underestimated the density and quality of mana that invaded him. It was extremely uncomfortable for him to be enveloped by the vigorous mana, as he forced himself to walk further away from the dome. Right now, Jason felt that the amount of mana was even thicker compared to the stone arch with the magical plants around, which shocked him. If Jason had such vast mana around him all the time, he would probably be already at the adept rank. This caused him to feel a distinct desire to sit down and absorb the mana around him. However, Jason reminded himself that it was way too dangerous to do something like that within a 2-star wild zone. One would only do something like that with comrades or guards around that would rescue the focused cultivator in order to prevent any issues. Jason saw many youths absorbing mana outside the dome, but almost all of them were protected by an expert or master-ranked bodyguards. If he had enough credits, he would probably do the same, as the amount of mana was extremely thick, and hiring a bodyguard to protect him might even be cheaper than high-graded mana stones. Thinking about this possibility, Jason smiled weirdly, as he continued his steps towards the 2-star zone. Holding the bow in one hand with an arrow already nocked, Jason immediately disregarded his thought and began to focus on his mission. The arrow was already supplied with Jason's mana all the time and his eyes perceived everything. Chapter 82 Hunt by Hydesgrain. The further Jason walked away from the dome, the less dense the mana around him became, and Jason assumed that it was because the distance from the mana vein widened. But that was not important right now, as he had a mission to do. Jason wanted to finish his assignment and obtain the delicious rewards promised by their teacher. Activating the video brace to record everything, Jason was ready to kill some awakened beasts, even if it was not really by his own strength. And that was also why Jason asked his teacher if he really could use everything except instant killing weapons and other things like that. The Vanguard labeled knowledge as strength, as such one could interpret his tactic as strength without being narrow-minded. He wasn't sure if the poison he bought was among the forbidden items, but the poison wouldn't kill his prey instantly because they had a certain degree of resistance that would let them suffer for around half a minute if he didn't hit their vital spots or kill them immediately. After around 10 minutes, Jason met the first small group of awakened beasts. There were 4 low awakened ranked goblin soldiers, which was the simplest kind of evolved basic goblins. Apparently, there seemed to be a small society of goblins in this 2-star wild zone which Jason wasn't aware of as he met one of their soldier troops. 2 of them had small stone swords in their small hands, while another one had a spear while the one in the back had a bow in his hand. Jason estimated their size to be around 1 meter, and their pointy ears and hideous grimace looked extremely disgusting with their light green colored skin. Before they could even see him, Jason had already sneaked up until he reached a distance of 70 meters, where he pulled back the bowstring and aimed at the archer. 70 meters was considered a large distance, even for Jason with his current strength, but the goblin soldiers were moving slowly, almost as if they didn't move. It wouldn't be impossible for him to estimate the perfect angle with his eyesight telling him how far his target was away. Loosening the string, Jason also released his mana transaction with the capsule as the arrow soared through the sky with a beautiful curve, before a dull asterisk ploop asterisk sound indicated him hitting one of the goblins. Shocked shrieks could be heard and the 3 goblin soldiers looked at their fallen comrade that had seemed to be alive, as it twitched. An arrow was stuck in its abdomen and the capsule almost immediately dissolved, releasing the lethal venom. While the goblin soldiers looked around for the perpetrator, a whir could be heard and the spear-holding goblin soldier slumped down next to the archer, alive but already unable to move a single inch. Only then, the goblin soldiers could see their enemy as they began to rush at Jason. A distance of 70 meters wouldn't be crossed in 1 or 2 seconds at their rank, and Jason took out normal arrows he used to shoot at the goblin soldiers in front of him. Goblins were one of the dumbest races that formed societies, but to Jason, this goblin soldier troop looked even dumber than all kinds of beasts he fought with as they run straight onto him, without caring about the defensive at all. Their eyes were bloodshot and one arrow after another flew through the sky, piercing into their flesh and organs. While the first sword-holding soldier fell after being spiked by 5 arrows in its belly, the other one was only roughly 20 meters apart from Jason, when he noticed his last comrade's death. Looking left and right, it was confused what happened. Before a word could be heard as the goblin soldier's vision blurred, when a plop resounded through its head. The last arrow pierced into the goblin soldier's skull, killing it immediately without causing much pain. Jason only shook his head, as he remembered fairy tales about the maliciousness of goblins and their crudeness. Dying at the hands of goblins like that would be embarrassing, and being raped by them even more so, as Jason couldn't even consider them as enemies for the weakest humans in his opinion. However, he could understand people being anxious, facing goblin commanders, chiefs, lords, or kings, as they were all said to be above Jason's combat prowess by a huge margin, with high wisdom at that. After picking up the goblin soldier corpses, he continued his search before he found another goblin troop only an hour later. But this time, there were 6 of them, while one was slightly larger than the rest. It had a large insignia tattooed on its head. Oh, it's a Major Prentice. Jason was astonished because it was extremely rare, but this made him also slightly suspicious. Since when are goblin Major Prentices involved with goblin soldier troops? Aren't they way too precious for such simple tasks, like hunting? It wasn't normal to have a Major Prentice at a hunting troop within a 2-star wild zone, and Jason wasn't sure why, but something seemed foul. But before he continued thinking about the strange situation, Jason wanted to finish his hunt and assignment. A Major Prentice was at least at the mid-awakened rank, but it wasn't difficult for Jason to kill it, because the Major Prentice goblin seemed way too confident. Like the previous group before, this troop didn't even imagine that it could be assassinated from a poisoned arrow, which however happened. Everything was over so fast, and Jason had used up 1 poisoned arrow for each goblin soldier, even if it was something of a waste. If he was only a little bit stronger, Jason would face these goblins head-on, but the difference of a whole rank was just too much for him to handle, once there was more than one opponent to face at the same time. Picking up the corpses, Jason noticed that the goblin Major Prentice was still not dead and only paralyzed by the lethal poison. Pulling out the arrow, he used the arrowhead to pierce through its throat, without hesitating for a single moment. For a race like the goblins, Jason wouldn't be gracious, because this race was said to be one of the most vicious races 300 years ago and abducted many women in order to rape them. Goblins were even worse than rats from more than 300 years ago because they could bring viruses and infections from everywhere. They raped and abducted women, to increase their population before they would continue their onslaught, and were seen as a living pest. Millions of humans died on their hands when the Mana outbreak occurred, and it was horrifying enough to think about it. Jason, however, was happy that his assignment was already finished, and he sent the recorded video immediately to his teacher while he ran back to the dome. Chapter 83 Where is My Reward? By Heidesgrain. Till was sitting over some documents inside his office, thinking about what to teach his students, after they noticed how weak they were because most wouldn't reach the assigned quota. When he received a notification from one of his students. It's Jason. A video clip already. Has he already defeated one beast? If I remember correctly, he would have to defeat low-awakened beasts. Maybe. He can reach the quota in a few days if he discovers some lone beasts within the 2-star wild zone. His combat prowess was definitely top-notch during the ranking battle. Till thought naively, while opening the video clip that was more than a few hours long. Luckily, Jason told him the rough time, and Till was astonished to see that Jason messaged him 2 different times he should look at. He already killed 2 beasts. That would be a very good achievement, considering that he has to fight against low-awakened beasts that are normally only found in groups. But once Mr. Gryle began to observe the fight, he immediately frowned deeply, because he could almost instantly tell that something was amiss with the arrows Jason shot. His eyesight was exceptional due to his high mana core rank, as they were constantly tempered and refined thanks to that. Furthermore, it was not really difficult to notice that something was wrong with Jason's arrows. The first goblin soldier Jason hit with his arrow couldn't even move a tiny bit after a short moment, and it looked like the arrow was the cause, even though it only pierced into the goblin's abdomen. Mr. Grile concluded that Jason used some kind of poison in order to incapacitate the goblin soldier, which was a good and easy strategy against awakened beasts. This was one strategy Mr. Grile wanted his students to use once they noticed that it was impossible or extremely difficult to hunt beasts 2 stages above one's rank. It was expensive, but surviving in the wilderness was more important than paying some credits in his opinion. One could say many bad things about him, but he wasn't stingy if it protected him or satisfied his curiosity. If all of his students finished their assignment, he would teach all 225 students a Tier 3 martial arts skill. Not even the students from the Vanguard main school could say that they've either learned a Tier 3 skill, even knowing someone who learned such skills was rare on Asterix. Wasn't this reward tempting enough for his students to question their own strength and capabilities? Facing the holographic video again, the other 2 goblins were sniped from a long distance with poisoned arrows, while the other 2 awakened ranked goblin soldiers had been spiked with normal arrows. As such, Jason had already killed 4 low awakened beasts within the first timestamp he provided Till. Looking at the second timestamp, Mr. Grile immediately sighted the goblin Major Prentice within the group of another 5 goblin soldiers. A Major Prentice in a soldier troop in a 2-star wild zone. What's going on? ... He was confused by the sight but continued to look at the battle, which seemed more like a massacre than an actual battle, as Jason only used the poisoned arrows to paralyze or kill the goblin soldiers within a minute. After the video ended, Till was astonished to notice that Jason already finished his assignment. However, that wasn't important to him right now. If a Major Prentice could be found in a normal hunting troop of goblin soldiers, it would mean the goblin society is growing way too fast and is enlarging without anyone controlling it. After he looked up the information of the particular 2-star wild zone Jason killed the awakened ranked goblins in, Till found out that there was not a single society registered within Syro City's log. This were essential bad news, causing him to have a bad premonition. After further research, he figured out that there was a recent uproar within the magical zone about many high-ranked hobgoblin warriors, goblin mages, and goblin riders killing many hunters at the magus rank. That could mean the magical zone was used by a high-ranked goblin chief or commander as a basement. Till sincerely hoped that there was no goblin king on Asterix, but it was uncertain. A king could bestow certain abilities to their offsprings which would be quite annoying, even for him. There had been a few goblin kings in the past, but not a single one on Asterix, and Till didn't want to think about the worst-case scenario he imagined in his mind. Nevertheless, it was already extremely dangerous for his students who had to hunt beasts 2 stages above. Now, with the appearance of goblin hunting groups with goblin major apprentices within 2-star wild zones, Till didn't even dare to imagine what could happen within 3-star wild zones. The most problematic fact about goblins was their intelligence and ability to repopulate extremely fast. They were more intelligent than beasts at their rank, and they always worked within a group. This caused Till to hesitate about what to do right now. At first, he sent the video clip about the Major Prentice to the city government and security that would strengthen the city defenses, in order to secure the protection of all citizens. The government would start their own investigation with a research team about the whereabouts of the goblin base size and the society's size. After informing his students that it was dangerous outside the dome, he emphasized that their life was more important than the assignment. He would provide everyone with enough information about the sudden goblin eruption, but that wouldn't mean the assignment ended. Everyone could decide for themselves what to do, and the assignment just became more difficult to pass. If one wanted to stay within the dome without even trying to finish the assignment, Till was sure that they wouldn't be able to reach higher ranks, as fear would hinder them in advance. Would they even be able to fight a life and death battle, or would they wet their pants before they were killed by some beasts? Even so, Till had to remain calm as he looked at the answers, which didn't disappoint him. No one backed down, most likely because of the generous rewards one would obtain, and all students were still motivated. Unfortunately, there were already some students that sustained injuries while fighting higher staged beasts, but the death toll was still empty. Meanwhile, Jason was already back in school, standing in front of his teacher's office, when he knocked. However, nobody opened the door and Jason noticed that it was locked. "Where is Mr. Grile?" He asked himself with doubt in his eyes, as he thought his own teacher might back off from his promise. Even after 10 minutes, nothing happened and Jason felt like he was ghosted, ignoring someone's message intentionally. Only after 20 minutes passed, he received a message from his teacher, "Wait. I'll be back soon." Apparently, he had something important to do, and little did Jason know, that everything had to do with his finds. Almost every minute new news about goblins appeared everywhere within the south area of Syro City, as there were the most infested 2-star zones with many goblin soldier troops appearing, slaying beasts while preying on weaker humans. Jason didn't know anything about that as he sat in the empty classroom, not knowing what to do. "Where is my reward?" He could only cry out in his mind before he decided to feed Scorpio some holy white Bakuri fruit juice his soulbond seemed to like before he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique. Scorpio gulped down another holy white Bakuri fruit reagent after another before he began to absorb a tiny amount of pure mana out of the mana stone. Jason noticed something in particular about Scorpio, and it seemed the amount he could absorb at once seemed to be slightly more than the day before. He was overjoyed and smiled gently at his small soulbond. Something changed about Scorpio, and it was definitely good. Fortunately, Scorpio didn't writhe in pain. It seemed as if the juice tasted good because Scorpio was longing for even more, which Jason gave him. After the last reagent was gulped down by Scorpio, the pain began to start once again, and both of them seemed to have predicted that. The small scorpion wasn't going to mold his exoskeleton now, but he spat out some tiny black clumps once in a while, which Jason didn't notice. After he finished practicing, Jason decided to absorb some mana outside school. Time passed without him realizing it, as it was already late afternoon. Jason finished his absorption, with a sour expression, when his teacher suddenly stood behind him. Looking at each other, it was noticeable that Jason was slightly angry when his teacher just said, "Good job, boy. Decide what technique you want to learn and I'll teach you." He didn't even say sorry for letting me wait for hours, without any explanation or a rough time when he would be back. Jason fumed in anger on his inside, while his outer appearance stared coldly at his teacher when a holographic screen appeared in front of Jason, with hundreds of skills listed. A loud "whoa" was the only thing that came out of Jason's mouth as his mind comprehended what he saw when he looked at the sheer mass of martial art techniques on the holographic screen. Special technique, Mana Manipulation. Transcendence Silent Death, Sword, TIER3. Advanced Water Manipulation, TIER3. Special Technique Elemental Fusion. Shadow Steps, TIER3. There were at least a dozen Tier 3 skills with at least 3 to 4 special and unique techniques that could be seen by Jason at a glance. The techniques below were probably peak Tier 2 techniques, and Jason wondered how a normal teacher would have such a vast variety of techniques in his quantum bracelet. Furthermore, having permission to hand them out to normal students just like that. Who could do that? Well, apparently his teacher. Looking carefully through all books with the distinct description, most had even a rating behind them, indicating the difficulty to learn them. It looked like the advanced water manipulation would be the easiest to learn among the Tier 3 techniques, but Jason had neither a water affinity nor the motivation to learn such a technique. The elemental fusion piqued his interest, but this was mainly for his future, which was still far away when he possessed a few soul bonds with all kinds of affinities. If that happened, he could use all kinds of elements together in order to amplify his combat prowess. However, After reading a certain description, Jason was immediately curious about it. He was immediately overjoyed looking at this technique, as it seemed perfectly fit for him, even though the difficulty frightened him somewhat. Unique Technique: Splitting Mind. Chapter 84: Unique Technique by Heidesgrain. Splitting mind is a dangerous technique that focuses on refining the brain in order to divide the practitioner's mind into a main area with the consciousness operating it normally, while the newly split sub-areas can be used unconsciously for certain tasks. Increases the brain's capabilities due to its refinement, while lessening the burden of doing many different things at the same time. Remark. Dangerous because the willpower needed to practice this technique is abnormal, while doing a single mistake inside the brain can cripple one permanently. Jason found this technique terrifying but also very exciting. He was always lamenting about the incapability of absorbing mana during the whole day, and now this technique appeared in front of him. Was this fate? If he practiced this technique to build a single sub-area inside his mind, using the passive mana replenishing, absorbing technique for 24 hours 7 days straight, without thinking about it, there wouldn't be a single wasted minute to absorb mana. With this combination of two techniques, Jason was confident in increasing his rank extremely fast. Maybe he would be able to reach Greg's rank in a few months like that, which ignited his determination even more. Greg would probably reach the 5th Adept rank in around 3 months, which was not excessively fast but also not slow. After learning how to absorb mana 24/7, Jason was also confident in achieving a similar feat. The only issue he had to face was the difficulty of the technique, and Jason roughly knew that even Tier 1 techniques were difficult to comprehend for normal humans below the Magus ranks. Tier 2 techniques were mainly learned by Magus ranks and above, and Jason was sure that even the worst Tier 3 technique would be hard as hell to learn. And now a unique technique was right in front of Jason, which was roughly equivalent to the most difficult Tier 3 techniques, if not blessed skills, that could only be learned by the most promising prodigies within humanity. Jason was unsure how the ranking was, and he had only heard fairy tales about blessed skills found in high-ranked rifts, which were humanity's most treasured skills and techniques. To understand them, one is said to need godlike comprehension and vast knowledge or something like that, but Jason didn't really care about the fairy tales he heard. However, now it was astonishing to see a unique in front of him. Till Grile noticed Jason's curiosity and his uncertainty, what technique to pick, which delighted him somehow. Some students would think that the assignment was over once they sent him the video clips, but the real test was something else. Which technique was the best for them to pick in order to increase their combat prowess as fast as possible within the shortest amount of time. He knew that it was weird to have so many high-tiered techniques, and some of his students might be suspicious about his background, but Till didn't mind that right now because he was looking at Jason with interest. Becoming interested in someone hadn't happened for quite a long time, which surprised him quite a lot. It reminded him about old times when he was studying on Kania, while both good but also bad memories surfaced in his mind. There was only 1 week left for his students to learn the techniques he provided, which was an extremely short amount of time. It was also unknown if some students were even able to understand the content within their techniques in this period of time. He would teach his students other techniques soon enough, but now was the only time his students would be able to learn humanity's top-tier martial arts skills. What would the black-haired youth in front of him choose? Picking a Tier 3 technique with high difficulty would mean he thought much of himself, overestimating his capabilities, while choosing a Tier 2 technique would be playing safe but also somewhat disappointing in Till's opinion. While Jason thought whether he should pick the splitting mind technique or not, he continued to search through the catalog of skills. Unfortunately, not a single technique was as exciting as the unique technique with its horrifying high difficulty. Till was expectantly looking at Jason while still thinking about the capabilities of the youth in front of him. He was extremely calm during the fight against a low adept and was capable to defeat such an opponent with his combat prowess and special trait eyes. Furthermore, he didn't care what his classmates thought about him, even if he fought a little bit dirty, which is the way to survive in the wilderness. His mana-absorbing talent is very good even among the youths on Canir, and it wouldn't be long until he catches up to his peers. But his Soul Awakening ranking. Ugh. He knew that Jason's Soul Awakening ranking was only 2 out of 5 stars, which were at most slightly above average, when one looked at Asterix or the archipelagos in total. However, for students at the 3 big schools and their affiliated school on Asterix, this was seen as below average, if spoken nicely. On Canir, even high schools from B-grade cities would laugh at him. Even worse was the miniature Parascore Jason recently soulbound until could only shake his head helplessly because he thought it was only a precious spot in Jason's soul world that had been wasted, without using other means to improve its limit. He continued thinking about Jason and his other classmates in order to figure out how to increase their strength as fast as possible, as he wanted to charge up the classes with them during the class battles in 3 weeks. Suddenly he was dragged out of his train of thoughts when he heard a sound next to him. It was Jason telling him what technique he wanted to learn from him for the next few days. "Teacher, I want to learn the unique technique, Splitting Mind, please." When Jason said that, he sounded confident, but his teacher was only looking at him with an open jaw, disbelief gleaming in his eyes. "Are you sure, Mr. Grile?" asked hesitantly. He would have never believed that Jason would pick this technique. Previously he was pondering if he should even add this technique to the catalog or not, but he decided to do that because he wanted to show them how many varieties of techniques existed and not for someone to pick. He himself had practiced this technique to the peak of the 2nd layer, but that was it. Furthermore, it took him more than a dozen years to reach that threshold. Till wasn't someone that liked to talk about age, but he wasn't as young as one would imagine, as his youthful years at the prime of his potential were already over a long time. He had only got the hang of this technique after utmost efforts after a long time past. Now, this young 14-year-old boy wanted to learn this technique. Didn't he read the description and the remark about the dangers? Yes, I'm sure. Till felt as if he was punched in his belly when Jason said that, and it took him a few minutes before he got the hang of himself again. He was disappointed, and Jason could see that when Till sent the file about the technique to him. Jason immediately received a notification, and a file with the size of a few gigabytes appeared within his quantum bracelet. More than 8,000 pages was the only thing Jason could see when he opened the technique manual. The letters were written in an extremely small size, which shocked Jason even more. "How long will it take to read this completely through?" Seeing Jason's shocked expression, Mr. Grile smiled sadly, thinking that it was an expensive lesson for Jason. Once Jason would find out how difficult a unique technique was to learn, he would probably regret his decision immediately. Trying to consult Jason, he said gently, "You just need to read the introduction part for the 1st level. I'll teach you for the rest of the week, and if you don't understand a single thing after a week, I grant you the chance to change the technique with a low difficult Tier 2 technique as a small punishment. This would be a special reward because you finished the assignment on the 1st day within such a short amount of time." Mr. Grile thought he was extremely generous because Jason wouldn't lose everything at once, as he could still learn a Tier 2 technique. "That is not needed, Mr. Grile. I'll persist and learn this technique, by all means." Jason sounded confident and looked ambitiously at Till, which made his heart ache painfully. "Ugh. Okay, you can go home now. Read the introductory until tomorrow and write down words you can't understand. If you have any questions, write them down. I'll answer them tomorrow. You just need to come to school like always, and we'll make individual lessons until your classmates arrive." Jason was extremely satisfied to have received such nice rewards for his first assignment as he rushed out of school with ambition and determination flickering in his eyes. Calling a shuttle, Jason practiced the Heaven's Hell technique because he didn't want to neglect it, before opening the Splitting Mind manual. Looking at the sheer page sizes from the introduction, Jason's face paled as he immediately knew that today would be a long night if he wouldn't have to make a night shift. Once Jason started reading the introductory part, he thought it would be easy for him to read a few pages at once until he arrived at home because of his fast reading ability, but it was the complete opposite. He wasn't even able to finish the first page when the shuttle stopped. Jason looked up with a frustrated facial expression and noticed that he was already at home. What kind of bull's tea is that? Chapter 85. You understand that? By Heidis Grain. More than half an hour passed when he used the shuttle in order to reach the house from school, but not a single page was deciphered by him. Was that even the same language? Jason thought so, but the problem was that too many difficult words prevented him from comprehending anything important. Reading around these difficult words was also not easy because they were required to understand something, causing him to frown. Jason walked inside the house with a disappointed expression as he was greeted by Greg, who sat inside the living room, reading something while nobody else could be seen. Greg noticed Jason's bad mood and they began a short conversation with him. Jason didn't say anything about the splitting mind technique because he wanted to surprise Greg with his heavenly fast cultivation speed. However, reading through the splitting mind introductory first page did Jason understand that there was a huge wall hindering him in learning the technique. His shallow knowledge. Jason had never learned anything about the anatomy of the brain, and now he wanted to try how to divide his mind into active main area and passive but unconscious used sub-areas. Did he want to kill himself like that? The only thing Jason knew was the fact that there were many thin mana channels within his brain maintaining, tempering, and speeding up the thinking process all the time. It was said that these thin mana channels were the reason why higher ranks would be able to think faster, process things better, while their comprehension increased with the elevation of one's level and rank. But Jason didn't know if that was really true. When Greg and Jason finished the short conversation, he picked up a few sandwiches from the fridge to eat them as went into his room. Normally Jason would read some books about beasts, evolutions, and magical ingredients used to evolve beasts because these themes were the most interesting for him recently. But not today. Jason decided to go through the first few pages of the splitting mind technique without the intention of understanding everything directly because he only wanted to write down the words he didn't know to start somewhere. Dozens of words were noted down and Jason searched them up in order to understand what was written on the first few pages. After getting to know the words he didn't know previously, Jason understood the rough meaning written down once he reread the pages multiple times. This continued for hours and Jason wasn't even aware of what was going on, while two holographic screens lightened up the darkroom Jason sat in, with his golden eyes shimmered in the darkness. One screen showed the splitting mind technique manual, while the other screen was a combination out of a dozen research pages with different main focus points. Jason wasn't even aware when the first sunlight entered his room, as he was delighted to understanding roughly what some pages really meant. The brain was extremely mysterious and Jason was astonished to see that so many complex information about the brain had been found out by dozens of scientists. He would never be able to get to know something like that, and Jason was extremely happy that there were many people explaining everything neatly to him. It was only when he felt a sudden pain in his right hand when Jason woke up from his enlightened and focused state. Scorpio pinched him with his stinger because the alarm clock annoyed him, and one had to say that the alarm clock was truly annoying, even in Jason's opinion. Looking at the time, he was shocked that it was already 7:20 a.m. as he immediately ordered a shuttle, before he rushed into the bathroom to wash up as he changed into his uniform. Rushing out of the house, he ran past Gabriella and Mark, who waved at him knowingly. They heard his alarm clock but both decided to ignore it, thinking Jason was sleeping soundly. Jason was working way too hard over the last few weeks and he had to replenish some energy. Sleeping was the best way to relax and replenish one's energy, causing the Flays to ignore his annoying alarm clock. Never would they have thought that Jason wasn't sleeping but rather putting up a night shift. Had they known that, Gabriella would have forced Jason to sleep because she was already worried about his health. Sitting inside the shuttle, he needed some time to calm down while practicing the painful Heaven's Hell technique was the best way for Jason to do that. Arriving at school, Jason had already finished his practice as he noticed that practicing the Heaven's Hell technique was becoming easier with time passing and accumulated experience while his soul energy increased. Normally it should be the other way around, but for Jason, it wasn't like that due to his high soul energy replenishing process. Running inside the classroom, Jason was the only one there, and he wondered when his classmates would finish their assignment because he didn't think it was too much of a hassle to come to the same conclusion as him. But that was not necessarily the case, because Jason was smart and diligent, but more importantly weak, while he didn't cower from using dirty tricks to finish his task. Maybe his classmates thought using poison would be unfair, forbidden, or maybe they really wanted to fight against beasts 2 stages higher than their own rank alone, without even the slightest help from their soul bonds or others. Logical spoken, it would already be difficult to defeat a beast at the same stage as one was without the amplified strength from one's soul bond, because the strength of beasts and humans was not comparable. Only after being strengthened by the shared amount provided by their soul bond, humans would be able to fight beasts at the same stage head-on, but not against beasts 2 stages higher than their own strength. If someone's first soul bond was a magical ranked beast that shared enough strength in order to fight late evolved beast while only being at the novice rank, why would this person go to a school on Asterix? There could also be someone with an essential strong physical soul that enhanced the physique multiple times, or extremely rare high amplifying elemental souls that amplifies affinities by a large degree, but who do these people think they are? Some kind of protagonist. More likely a new candidate for stupid reincarnation. Instead of jumping in front of a truck, serve yourself as dinner for some starving beasts if these individuals wanted to die fast. Jason was waiting for his teacher while looking at the class chat group where some students complained about the unfair assignment, causing Jason to shock his head. Do they think rewards will fall from the sky without them doing anything? These students could learn precious techniques as a reward, and Jason was immediately disregarding the previous thought he had about his classmates. They were dumb and useless. He initially wanted to write into the group chat that they could use poison in order to solve their issue with evolved ranked beasts if they were questioning each other about how to deal with higher staged beasts and what one could do. However, the few classmates who wrote something in the chat group were only lamenting about the current situation, and Jason immediately understood that the students that tried their best were not wasting their time with such a useless chat group. It was exactly 8 a.m. when Mr. Gryle entered the classroom as he sat down in front of Jason. Jason was supposed to start his questions about the splitting mind technique, and there were still many things he couldn't understand even after doing some research online. Mr. Gryle, can you explain the unconscious connection between the sub-areas of the brain in context to the significance of the mana channels flowing through the brain, the uses, benefits, and possible problems that could occur during the transformation of the brain while practicing the fair level of the splitting mind technique? Till listened to Jason before his mouth twitched for a moment. He had thought Jason would ask a simple question for the beginning in order to explain certain words, but the 14-year-old youth in front of him asked questions like that after reading the manual for a few hours. Can you already understand the previous parts of the introductory? He unconsciously blurred out. However, Jason just nodded his head at the astonished-looking teacher as he didn't think it was something special. Since birth, Jason had a determined and ambitious personality. Otherwise, how would a 4-year-old child be able to endure gathering mana particles inside his eye for almost 10 years straight? After regaining his eyesight, his determination became even stronger and firmer. Learning and understanding the splitting mind technique was extremely important for Jason, causing his mind to work with 200% speed during the whole night in order to comprehend anything at all. Luckily, the mana in his mana pool was regenerating his energy, and he could replenish the used up mana while waiting for his teacher. Till was still suspicious about the student in front of him because Jason was asking a complex question that required a certain amount of understanding. As such, he began to ask Jason questions about the introduction of the Splitting Mind manual. However, to his surprise, Jason answered the questions with flying colors, leaving Till with a weird facial expression. Till was extremely jealous about Jason's comprehension ability because he wasn't able to do something like that when he was 14 years old. When he was 14 years old, He was already relatively mature, but Jason was completely different, as he had a weird aura around him, seemingly like he was already matured, looking at the world differently than his peers. After he had calmed down to some degree, he decided to answer Jason's questions with a mountain of details. Hours passed and Jason's questions didn't seem to find an end. Rather than ending, they seemed to become more complex, and it looked like Jason was receiving enlightenment by his teacher's explanations, causing only more questions to come up in his mind, even if they weren't necessary for the splitting mind technique. Chapter 86, First Level by Hydesgrain. Over the rest of the week, nothing special happened, while the first students finished their assignment on the third day. They chose their desired rewards with gleaming eyes, while some other students sustained serious injuries. At the end of the week, around 40 students had come up with plans to kill beasts 2 stages higher than their own rank. While some of them assassinated their prey, others backstabbed fighting beasts and killed them like that, or installed traps that would kill them. Weirdly enough, there were only a handful of students that poisoned their targets as he did. Meanwhile, a few classmates were even able to fight Beast 2 stages higher head-on. Upon looking closer, Jason noticed that their mana core was relatively low-ranked, while their mana core size was extremely large. Furthermore, it looked like almost all of them were special assigned students with a scholarship, or like Jason knew some nobles that used their nobility rights for them. Jason concluded that their first soul bond had to be an evolved beast, or their soul was unique in some ways, but he didn't really care about these people as he didn't have enough time to understand his chosen technique completely. The last week was extremely important to him because he had to understand at least the first level before his teacher would stop answering his questions about the splitting mind technique. He hadn't slept for a single minute over the last week, while the only time he could relax was during the time he fed Scorpio with the holy white Bakuri fruit juice and during the practice of the Heaven's Hell technique. It was extremely tiring, but using mana stones to replenish his mana, Jason could his sleepless state without having too many issues. Seeing Scorpio scarfing down the first small pieces of the holy white Bakuri fruit was astonishing to him, as his soul bond began to writhe in pain almost instantly. The astonishing fact was, however, once Scorpio stopped writhing in pain, he wanted to eat the next piece. If Jason didn't stop Scorpio from eating the holy white Bakuri fruit, he would be worried about his soul bond's health. Maybe his soul bond would only be in pain for a short period after eating the holy white Bakuri fruit wholly. Maybe not, and Jason wasn't sure about that, but safety first. Even so, Scorpio grew up to a length of 8 centimeters, and it was infinitely close to reach the 3-star wild beast rank, which was its innate limit. Jason thought it would have its second molting when it reached the 3-star rank, which wasn't far away. But that wouldn't mean Scorpio was matured once that happened. Jason found out that his purity theory was working as he began to notice the first faint, almost invisible strands of black lights radiating from Scorpio's mana core a day ago, which caused him to be extremely joyous. His soul energy was increasing steadily, and it wouldn't be long until he would reach the threshold of 10 soul energy, which Jason longed for. The soul energy was already stable and purified enough in order to start practicing the second level of the Heaven's Hell technique, while the only requirement left was soul energy of 10 units. Jason was infinitely close to completely understand the first level of the splitting mind technique, which would allow him to form the first sub-area inside his mind, which was his current goal. This would be the perfect time for him. Once he finished constructing the first sub-area, Jason would only need to assign the tasks to the sub-area, and the task would be like playing an idle game, receiving the benefits from it, without lifting a single finger. Right now Jason sat in the classroom with the 40 other students who passed the assignment, and Mr. Grail was walking around busily, answering everyone's questions in a detailed manner. His other classmates were even worse off than Jason because most weren't as persistent and determined as he was, even if they only took a tier 3 technique with 1 or 2-star difficulty. While not a single one picked a special or unique technique, the students who had an elemental affinity took the particular advanced affinity book, while others preferred offensive techniques with their most skilled weapon. If everyone who finished their assignment worked hard through the next few weeks, their combat power would soar through multiple ranks, allowing them to fight beasts at least one stage higher than them head-on, without risking their lives with traps and other dirty tricks. At least that's what Jason thought. He was still unsure why their teacher was so generous to them, but apparently, he was either greedy to improve his students' combat power to fight the other classes head-on, or he had some other reasons that he couldn't comprehend with his available knowledge. The splitting mind technique had various stages or levels, and each one would enable his mind to construct an additional sub-area. While the first level was the easiest, the following were only becoming more difficult to understand and comprehend. But that was not even the worst. The brain was still a mystery for humanity, and it was too dangerous and taxing for one's mind to create too many sub-areas. Mr. Greil said that one should at most create 2 or 3 sub-areas because creating a 4th sub-area was not possible by the momentary means. What these means were, was unknown to Jason, but he thought it might be the mana core rank or the degree of tempering one's brain went through. Mr. Greil even told him that if he was able to create his first sub-area before reaching the Magus rank, he shouldn't construct a second one before ranking up to the Magus, if not the Grand Magus rank. Jason was only half-heartedly listening to this advice, as he wanted to create 2 sub-areas as soon as possible due to his passive mana gathering technique and another theory that spun in his mind a long time ago. The permanent tempering of one's soul world core. It was said that one can immediately use the produced soul energy ejected by the soul world core in order to inject it again into the soul world core by forming a chain or circle with the ejected soul energy. This could cause a continuous tempering of one's soul world core. However, this would also cost a lot of focus and brought other issues. First, one had to be careful in order to make everything correct, as a fault during the soul energy injection could damage the soul. Furthermore, one would have to collect the ejected soul energy to form a thread before injecting it. All these procedures would take a lot of concentration. There was also the problem with the time soul energy needed to regenerate. Normally one would need 24 hours to completely eject one's soul energy out of the core, and with a soul energy of 100 units, one would only regenerate around 4.2 soul energy per hour. Forming a continuous chain of procedures would be entirely useless for someone with such a little soul energy. This was also useless for someone with soul energy of 1000 because the regeneration would be around 0.7 soul energy per minute. One would need to divide the focus on the necessary things one was doing while at the same time carefully form the ejected soul energy into threads, before injecting them at the right spot of the soul world core. Jason thought, once he created his second sub-area, he would use this area to continuously temper his soul energy because his regeneration time was a third compared to others, which meant that he would regenerate almost 2.1 soul energy per minute while having a soul energy of 1000 units. He was almost daydreaming and lost focus for a moment before his eyes stared back at the splitting mind technique. It was already evening and everyone went home when Jason was still torturing his teacher with questions. Till was happy that Jason was so diligent, and he was even more astonished about his students' comprehension ability because, in a single week, Jason was able to almost completely understand the first level of the splitting mind technique. Mind division. Right now, Jason was asking the core questions and Till felt that after answering all questions, Jason might as well start creating his first sub-area. After the 4th day, Till noticed Jason's extreme ambition and determination, which caused him to be astounded, and right now Jason looked like his desire to start practicing the first level was devouring him completely. Jason now knew what to do and how to construct his first sub-area, but there was one major problem he had to face. With this in mind, Jason wanted to ask for some advice from his teacher, feeling slightly ashamed. Clearing his throat, he wasn't sure how to start until noticed that as he was already aware of the problem Jason faced. You want to know how to gather enough mana in order to temper your brain, forcing it to split your consciousness without burdening or damaging it, while being at the novice rank, right? Jason's eyes widened and he could only nod dejectedly. The thing that annoyed Jason the most wasn't that practicing the first level. Mind division would be extremely painful, which was kinda logic, but the information that he would need a vast amount of mana. There were even some rough calculations made, that discouraged Jason quite a lot. Someone at the Magus rank or higher would have to inscribe a large mana gathering circle with the main ingredients being a non-elemental guardian ranked mana core with more than 100 grade 3 mana stones stored within the circle at the worst. Even 100 grade 1 mana stones would cost 5 million credits, but grade 3 mana stones. Purchasing a head-sized one with 5 million credits would already be a wonder. Jason wasn't even remotely close to the Magus rank, and he researched about certain magical treasures protecting one's brain during the tempering. Unfortunately, he couldn't find anything within the official websites, which left him somehow dejected and frustrated. His teacher was his last hope because he would know what Jason could do because of his background seemed special. Well, that's kinda difficult with your capabilities. Till started, and Jason's heart sunk into the ground before he continued. Obtaining a non-elemental guardian ranked mana core is easy, and mana stones are rare and expensive, but that's it. A few hundred star notes should do the job. The main issue is unfortunately something else. Considering your rank, you would need a high-grade magical treasure to protect your brain during the whole procedure. Such a treasure can't be found on Asterix and is also exceptionally rare to find on Canir. Jason felt his heart exploding. After trying so hard to understand the technique during the last week, his last hope was about to die when he heard his teacher mumbling. "Do I have something like that, or at least something similar?" Jason wished away the non-existing tears that might begin to pour down his cheeks as he waited patiently for his teacher to say something. Maybe he could help him. Money can be earned, but getting the hang of the treasure Jason required was almost impossible for him to do with his current capabilities. After some time, it looked like his teacher remembered something as he looked at him with a painful facial expression. "Can you endure pain? And I mean real pain. Maybe you would wish to rather die than to survive, but that won't happen until you finish the designated task." Chapter 87, Devilish Valkyrie by Hydesgrain. Jason immediately jumped up from his seat, shouting, "Yes!" Looking astonished at Jason's enthusiasm, Till recalled a treasure he found a long time ago. Shuddering in fear, he wouldn't even wish his archenemy to consume it. "I have a kind of fruit that can protect your life until you finish creating your sub-area. Unfortunately, it will cause devastating pain and you'll most likely wish to die to end the torture. Adding on the pain you'll have to endure because of the tempering and splitting of your brain, I'm not sure if you should do that in order to stay mentally fit. It's not unlikely that your mental health will suffer if you don't get crazy or similar to brain dead." Now Jason hesitated for a second and he looked at his teacher with fear in his eyes. Nevertheless, he was resolute in his decision. Jason didn't want to wait until he reached the Magus rank to establish his first sub-area. "At least, I now know there is a way to create my first sub-area. If you would sell the treasure to me, I would be grateful. Unfortunately, it's very likely that I'll need a long time to gather enough star notes until I've everything together in order to repay you." Till looked at his student and he liked the youth in front of him the most because of his personality and talent. Why does he want to create his first sub-area so soon? Is it urgent? It has been a long since someone awoke his curiosity and he wanted to make a decision only to lay out and bait in order to test Jason. "What if I provide you with everything you need to create your first sub-area?" he said nonchalantly. Being hit off guard, Jason was unsure what to say about this offer. It was definitely tempting, but there were two unknown factors. 1. Why should his teacher do something like that? 2. Can I handle the pain right now and are the benefits worth the pain? The latter factor could be answered with a definite yes. Gathering and absorbing mana for 24/7 would increase his cultivation speed multiple times, considering that subconsciously absorbing mana was only slightly less effective than actively doing it. But he would have more time to practice his martial art techniques in the meantime and could also increase his knowledge instead of absorbing mana for hours. Normally Jason absorbed mana for at least 3 hours a day, and this could be completely discarded, while his cultivation speed would increase at the same time without doing anything at all. Wasn't it just too beneficial? What was pain in contrast to that? Jason's will had to be strong enough to endure it to prevent it from going crazy, but that was all. He was still unsure why his teacher would offer him something like that, but over the last 2 weeks, Jason could roughly form an understanding of his teacher's character. He was hiding something big, but he wasn't hiding in particular, otherwise, he wouldn't allow his students to learn Tier 3 techniques which couldn't be considered staying low-key. The students would tell their parents and friends about it, and it was easy to find out if one practiced a high-tiered martial art technique. Figuring out where they obtained such techniques would only be a matter of time then. That meant, he was definitely not a criminal. Till was also kind and patient towards his students and answered everyone with great insights. The only problem was his strict teaching. While it only gave benefits to his students, he sounded rough. This, however, couldn't cover up his generosity, which some couldn't appreciate, as a few parents from students were complaining about the difficulty of the given assignment. Mr. Gryle ignored them, and there was not much one could do against it, but Jason found these students and their parents quite rude. Trying to pressure my teacher with empty complaints. Piss off. Jason liked his teacher, and he was confident in his gut feeling as he opened his mouth while looking at his teacher with determination. I can endure it, he shouted loudly. It was like Till could see through Jason's train of thoughts. If he had the same chance at such a young age, he would probably do the same as Jason. He himself only created his first sub-area when he reached the Grandmagus rank, and it was a vast difference to passively gather, absorb and transmute mana into liquid without doing anything at all. It was extremely slow, but considering that converting mana into liquid was the taxing procedure he also did actively, his mana core rank increased much faster than without the sub-area in his mind. He also liked Jason a lot and wanted to give him the choice to decide whether to give it a chance and risk his life or to wait until he reached the Magus rank. As for getting paid, it was more likely that Jason would reach the Magus rank before he would be able to amass the star notes needed for the magical treasure, mana stones, and the cheapest amongst the materials, the non-elemental guardian mana core altogether. Okay, I should have everything with me right now. Do you want to immediately start, or do you want to wait until tomorrow? Quote. Right now, please. Jason was becoming impatient as he voiced his opinion out without hesitating anymore, and he wasn't sure if he would still do it, if he could reconsider his decision once again. As such, he wanted to begin right now. With your current control over mana, the whole process of creating a sub-area will take at least 24 hours, if not more. You can still choose to decline my offer. If you still want to do it, call your home and say that you'll stay at school for some days. If you're done, come to my office. I'll still do it. I call immediately. Jason said, not even thinking about the time his teacher told him. Even so, he was still shuddering in fright which couldn't be hidden anymore. Calling the Fleurs, saying that he would stay in school for some days, everyone felt a little bit confused, but they wouldn't ask Jason if he didn't want to talk about the reason. Jason was already mature in their eyes, and he knew what he was doing. Furthermore, they weren't his real family and couldn't force him to not stay out if he wanted to. After he was done, Jason went to his teacher's office, where he suddenly saw an additional room behind the bookshelves, which astonished him slightly. Walking inside, he could see his teacher gracefully inscribing a 20-meter diameter large magic circle with a head-sized transparent marble floating in the center, 20 centimeters above the ground. Below it was a jade box with beautiful inscriptions on it, and Jason concluded that it was a box used for magical plants to prevent them from losing their effect upon getting plucked. The transparent marble had dark blue runes inscribed on it which were shining lightly. Upon hearing Jason coming inside, Till explained everything calmly. Inside the jade box is the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit you'll have to eat before activating the magic circle. After eating, you'll have to take the Overlord Behemoth mana core inside your hand. which will activate the mana gathering circle with the slightest injection of mana. You don't have to immediately use up all the mana around you, and even if you try, it's impossible. The mana will stay inside the magic circle and you can slowly use it to refine your brain, because the Devilish Valkyrie Shield fruit will protect you life, even if it is hellish painful. Just endure it and slowly temper your brain and split it after you've rechecked that every step was done perfectly. You are not allowed to make a mistake, okay? Jason's mind was blank. Devilish Valkyrie Shield fruit, Overlord Behemoth. What? Is the Overlord Behemoth a Guardian ranked beast? Was the only thing he could ask, because his mana eyes told him that the mana inside this core was almost completely liquefied. It's a Lord ranked beast, was the only thing his teacher said, and Jason figured out what the rank above Guardian was, which would normally delight him. But not now. Jason grew anxious, looking at the Lord-ranked beast core, telling himself hundreds of times that he could endure it, while his whole body trembled. While being inside the magic circle, he couldn't take Scorpio with him. Letting him stay outside, Jason lamented his second soul bondswell, as he was unwilling to enter the soul world with Artemis evolving inside. While Till was inscribing the magic circle, Jason decided to feed Scorpio some pieces of the holy white Bakuri fruit, because he would probably be unable to do so during the following day. After Scorpio ate 2 pieces, he writhed slightly, but it looked like the pain was becoming less, which made Jason happy. Furthermore, Jason calculated that Scorpio would have his second molting tomorrow while he was creating his sub-area. After Scorpio's second molting was done, he would be at the 3-star rank, and Jason was already expectant how long it would take for him to break through his racial limit, because his potential showed signs of improving. It was now midnight and Till finished inscribing the magic circle on time, as he placed multiple magic stones at the designated area. Some magic stones had the size of a football while others were double the size, and Jason wondered if that were really only grade 3 magic stones or already grade 4 magic stones due to the vast amount of mana he could see with his eyes, causing them to ache slightly, forcing Jason to close his eyes. He understood that the amount of mana inside the magic circle was extremely vast, and only now was he fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. But now Jason wouldn't back out as he slowly walked inside the magic circle. Sitting down, he immediately began to sweat due to the mana fluctuations that pressured him. Opening the jade box in front of him, a sweet stench impregnated the whole room, and the fruit he saw in front of him was silver in color, looking like a fat miniature shield while the outlines were somewhat blackish. If one looked closely, one would barely a cruel face behind the facade of the shield, and Jason shuddered seeing that. This was however not the only thing that caused Jason to shudder in fear, but also the dense dark blue color, spreading from the fruit in his hand. Jason had never seen such a color, but he was sure that it was not the color of a guardian rank, and his hand holding the fruit began to tremble. Overcoming his anxiety, Jason put the whole fruit in his mouth before biting on it. Sweet juice filled his mouth, and it was almost addicting to him as he wanted to savor the taste, as he forced himself to gulp it down as fast as possible, because his teacher told him that the pain would begin roughly half a minute after taking the first bite. Taking the Lord-ranked mana core into his hands, Jason immediately activated the magic circle, as bright runes emerged from the magic circle. A small dome was forming around the magic circle as the mana stones slowly dissolved, creating a thick blue shining fog within. The fog was transforming in liquid, and it seemed like it was raining inside the small dome when Till looked somewhat expectant at the scenario in front of him as he noticed the liquefied mana. Did I put in too many grade 4 mana stones? He wondered, slightly worried. Chapter 88, Surviving 1000 Deaths by Hydesgrain. In the beginning, Jason didn't feel any kind of pain at all, and he imagined that his teacher was exaggerating the effect of the Devilish Valkyrie Shield fruit when a small silver shining membrane enveloped him from inside out. After he was completely enveloped and everything was sealed off safely, his body began to itch lightly, which was only a little bit uncomfortable to Jason. This itching became more apparent as only a few seconds passed. It suddenly felt more like a knife was stabbed in every cell of his body. He couldn't focus on refining his brain or splitting it due to the searing pain that became even worse over time. not only felt his body as if he was stabbed continuously but also as if he was skinned alive, burned, drowned, his nails torn out, eyes ripped apart, his brain thrown into a mixer, and additionally 100 different types of killing methods tortured him. Jason could have never imagined the pain would be that excessively. F*K, he cried out and bloody crimson tears began to pour out of his eyes, while Till saw everything from the outside worriedly. Focus on your task. The pain will be less like that, but unfortunately, Jason couldn't hear him at all. Half an hour passed and Jason had still not begun to refine his brain. Finally, after gathering his thoughts under the unimaginable pain, Jason forced the marginal-sized liquid he tried to control for an unknown time closer enough to his eyes, which he immediately absorbed. Jason knew that the pain would be extreme, but he imagined nothing like that. Fortunately, he was prepared. When he fought Leo, Jason found out that the pain of his earth-spiked calves lessened the moment he poured mana inside his eyes. It was only a quarter of a second or less, but right now liquefied mana was absorbed by his eye as the bloody tears lessened when a golden light radiated out of them, illuminating the whole magic circle. Till noticed Jason's eyes brightening up while the light was illuminating. It seemed like the pain Jason had to endure was lessened by a large degree, caused him to calm down slightly. He can do it. Jason's pain eased up, and even if it was still hellish painful, he could think calmly for the moment. Continuing to absorb mana into his eyes, he only stopped after thinking it was more than enough to supply him for at least 24 hours. After that, Jason began to follow the Splitting Mind's first-level description carefully. His calm mind caused Jason to have full focus on the process of refining his mind and splitting it. Hours passed and the eased pain began to increase once again, and Jason couldn't really do anything against it. However, now even with the increased pain, his mind was focusing on the refining process and stability. The first sunlight shone through the window and Till was still waiting for Jason, both patiently and impatiently at the same time. He decided to tell the other teachers to look out for an instructor in order to teach some martial art techniques to his students over the next 2 days, without giving a reason for this decision. Leaving Jason alone would be irresponsible, but that didn't mean it was needed to tell anyone about Jason constructing the first sub-area from the Splitting Mind technique. If someone knew that, they would call him a devil, after finding out he gave out the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit to a novice rank, which was crazy. Maybe he would really be called a devil and hunted if something were to happen to Jason. Who knows, but that wasn't important right now, because Jason was struggling and barely hanging on his focus due to the immense pain he had to endure. Time passed slowly, and to Jason, it felt like he was about to die over and over again, while only God could tell him how much time passed, as it was an eternity to Jason. The only thing Jason led to hang on was his indestructible will to finish the creation of the first sub-area. An eternity passed and Jason finally finished refining his brain, as he could feel his train of thoughts accelerate by leaps and bounds, but more important right now was that he could finally start the mind-splitting process. If his mind was a cake, he would now slice apart around 1/100th from it and construct an independent system out of it. This step was even more difficult than the first one, as the pain was becoming even more horrifying when Jason split apart his own mind. As he was about to lose his mind, the golden light in his eyes illuminated the magic circle once again, calming him down for a second before the pain reappeared slightly weakened. He unsure how many times passed, but fixing the larger part of his split mind, before he could start constructing the sub-area was done somewhen as he relaxed. Because Jason relaxed, his tension loosened up and the horrifying pain he endured the whole time in a weakened state, reappeared immediately, causing Jason to cry out in shock and pain. Shouldn't it be done? My task is finished. Hello Valkyrie fruit. Jason could only lament and endure the pain, while he wasn't sure what was going on. On the outside, almost 30 hours have passed and Till expected Jason to finish soon, which made him happy when he noticed Jason loosening his tension. A radiant smile appeared on his face before a horrifying cry could be heard, with Jason shuddering in pain. What is going on? Hasn't he finished forming the sub-area? He was as clueless as Jason, but his knowledge was vaster than Jason's, causing Till to conclude many theories within a short amount of time. Seeing the liquefied mana floating around the mana circle, a bad feeling arose within him. Jason didn't know what to do, and he had to concentrate really hard in order to think of a solution while enduring the endless pain. "Is my task not finished yet?" was the only solution Jason could think of after some time, and concluding the facts, he probably had to completely construct his sub-area before the pain would lessen, probably. He wasn't exactly sure how to instruct his subconscious to practice the passive mana gathering and absorbing technique, because he wanted to do that after forming the sub-area. This however changed now, as he had to experiment with all kinds of possibilities while he was dying 1,000 deaths. An unknown amount of time passed with dozens of failed experiments before Jason finished a rough and crude construction of his passive mana gathering and absorbing technique, which immediately began to work. While mana was gathering and refined into his mana core, Jason felt the pain lessen by a marginal amount, but even so, it was still apparent and tormenting his whole body. Why is the pain still apparent? Jason asked himself, not knowing what was going on. Did he do something wrong? He was unsure, but other than the pain from the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit, there was no pain. Right now a long time must have passed, and Jason had done everything possible to finish the task. He forced himself to open his eyes. He had forcefully closed after some time, as Jason felt it was much easier to endure the pain when a golden light illuminated the room again for a second before it vanished once again. During this second, Jason could see Till standing right in front of the magic circle, looking at him worriedly. Jason knew that his teacher couldn't save him. If he interrupted his task, the pain he was enduring right now would be permanent, and Thi was not something someone should endure permanently. Noticing Jason looking at him, Till's mind was thinking with an overwhelming speed as he exalted some of his liquefied mana in order to write a word in the air. Jason could only read the first two letters, before the pain reappeared, forcing him to instinctively shut his eyes once again. Ma. ... What's that? It hurts. Minutes passed and his sub-area was refining mana diligently while Jason didn't know what to do right now when he thought for a moment. Mana. What about the mana? Is that my task? Why? I don't get it. But it didn't sound unreasonable. The more his passive mana gathering and refining technique absorbed, the less the pain became, even if it was almost not perceptible. At least he knew a new path to lessen the pain, and Jason began to actively absorb the mana greedily while opening all his pores, which caused his pain only to increase. If that wasn't working, Jason didn't know what else he could do as he absorbed the mana with all his might, which couldn't be said to be much. Hours passed and unknowingly, Jason broke easily through the 7th novice rank. Another few hours passed and his mana core was already consolidated, but his cultivation was still increasing more and more, while the liquefied mana in his surrounding didn't seem to lessen by much. He would normally be overjoyed to increase his mana core rank, but the pain caused him to almost lose his mind, as Jason didn't know how many thousands of deaths he already endured. The torture he endured began to slowly kill him from the inside, frightening Jason even more. It felt as if he was absorbing mana way too slow, because he couldn't endure the pain anymore after he broke smoothly into the 8th novice rank without noticing it. Suddenly a thought reappeared in his mind when he was about to give up. My eyes. ... With the appearance of his last ray of hope, Jason began to gather his mana inside his eyes, which began to release a golden, calming light inside the magic circle, and the pain began to lessen around him. There was still a lot of mana, but the pain was much easier to endure, and Jason was about to cry out in joy. Instead of crying, Jason forced himself to focus on gathering mana inside his eyes, which would be more helpful. The more liquefied mana gathered within his eyes, the less was the pain Jason received, as he seemed to go almost crazy. The golden light cleansed his mind to a certain extent. While his recently constructed sub-area consolidated his 8th novice rank mana core, Jason's eyes greedily absorbed the surroundings mana. More than 60 hours passed since Jason began with the procedure of constructing his first sub-area when the pain completely vanished. Without the will to hold onto the Lord-ranked mana core anymore, his grip loosened up. When the mana core fell to the ground, Jason's wet eyes could only see his teacher running to him. Jason began to cry, as he gripped his teacher's clothes, not letting him go, when his teacher held him into his embrace, with guilt shining in his eyes. Chapter 89 I'm Sorry by Hydesgrain. An unknown amount of time passed until Jason finally gathered his emotions slightly under his control. When he loosened up his firm grip from his teacher's clothes, Jason could see tears in his teacher's eyes, which wondered him slightly. A weak, "I'm sorry," was the only thing Jason could hear, and he wasn't aware that his teacher was almost crying in front of him. Till didn't know that such an accident would happen, and the worst thing was that he wanted to be generous to Jason as a promising student. As such, Till placed many grade 4 mana stones into the magic circle without considering the dangers that might occur. He himself had once eaten a devilish Valkyrie shield fruit to finish a certain exercise, but he endured the pain only for 12 hours. He was multiple ranks higher than Jason, and it wasn't even remotely comparable. Still, he never wanted to feel like that ever again, but now he foolishly gave such a fruit to his students, who endured such pain for 5 times the length he himself had to endure. He gave him the fruit, which was the main cause for the exaggerated long time his dear student was tortured. Thinking about the pain Jason had to endure, Till embraced Jason again, and he continuously apologized. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Jason was still overwhelmed by his emotions, and it took some time until his dried-up voice rang out. "It's okay," Jason said faintly, and he roughly knew why his teacher was apologizing. He noticed the grade 4 mana stones and was thankful for them before. Now, however, did Jason hate them more than anything else. Nevertheless, Jason accepted his teacher's offer and the devilish Valkyrie fruit, after getting reminded about the dangers many times. Even if the last few days would be imprinted deep into his mind for his whole life, Jason finished constructing his first sub-area already, and he was only a novice rank at that. Even so, right now it was not that comforting for him when Jason finally noticed a 10-centimeter long scorpion trying to climb up his clothes, struggling to reach Jason's head. His teacher was loosening up the embrace and looked at Jason, taking a glance if his eyes were not dulled or if he was crazy through the unbearable pain he endured after finally regained control over his emotions. Staying up, he helped Jason, who was holding Scorpio. Jason was mentally completely exhausted, but he still noticed Scorpio's lush green exoskeleton and wondered why it looked like that. Activating his eyes for a short moment, Jason noticed that Scorpio's mana core was now radiating a denser black color as Till noticed him taking a look at his soul bond. "I have to say that your personality is really weird. You're impatient and irritating. Wasn't it a little bit too dangerous to feed your maturing soul bond a mana core cleansing fruit, even if it was the weakest possible one?" He questioned Jason while holding up his grade 2 perennial Neoxid box that was empty. "Your soul bond somehow opened the box and ate everything when I was worried about you, and it began to undergo a molting. Now it's completely green, and I can sense that it is slightly stronger than before." Jason scratched his head in embarrassment, but his will was completely used up, without him being able to tell a lie, as he told Till that he considered almost everything within the purity theory and his own research. He also told his teacher how exactly he did what he did and how careful he was. "It could have been extremely dangerous for your soul bond and your soul, but never mind. It worked, but I'm curious if you already knew it would work and someone told you that the theory was already proven, which could be considered a secret of the big clans, or if you just experimented with your own soul and your soul bond's life, fool." Till lectured Jason for a short moment before he noticed that he told his student that the theory was already proven and a top secret at that. Not many people on the archipelago knew about the purity theory and its worth, while much more people were aware of it on Canir. But it was still cheaper to purchase a beast with potential than buy expensive core cleansing fruits. However, this was when beast creators came into play, which interested Jason, but Till wouldn't answer him right now. Till was still embarrassed because he cried in front of his student while the whole situation they were in was getting awkward. Before Jason could say anything, Till told him that he should go home, sleep and regain his mental energy, before coming back when once he was ready. Almost 40 minutes later, Jason arrived at the Flays house, where he was greeted with warm hugs before he was pushed away gently as his clothes were full of impurities and reeked extremely bad. They wanted to know what happened, but seeing Jason walking around like a living zombie, they let him go into his room, where he subconsciously took off his clothes before he fell into the bed. Jason had not slept long for the last 10 days, when one included the time he needed to learn everything about the Splitting Minds first level. Right now was the first time he smelled his bed once again, and it felt like he was sucked into before the darkness devoured him as Jason closed his eyes. While sleeping, the pain he felt during the last 3 days resurfaced, and Jason couldn't wake up from the nightmare he lived through, even if he knew that he was sleeping. There was nothing Jason could do as his limbs were torn out, his eyes dug out, getting skinned alive, and the only thing he was able to do was to cry. Jason was crying in pain, and he was too scared about the pain when a golden light covered him, loosening his tension. His body shook violently, and Jason was forcefully waken up from the nightmare while his back was completely covered in cold sweat. Suddenly he felt the unimaginably vast amount of mana stored inside his eyes declining in a rapid pace as Jason sensed that the memories about the pain and torture he went through over the last days were becoming more distant and untouchable for him. It was as if his memories were stored away and locked, and Jason suddenly felt too tired to comprehend what happened when he fell into a dreamless sleep. He wasn't sure how much time passed, but it was already bright when he woke up, and Jason felt somewhat weird, completely different from the time before he constructed his sub-area. He could still feel pain in his heart to a certain extent, and how painful it was, in addition to him wanting to die rather than enduring the pain for 60 hours. But somehow, Jason didn't feel scared anymore. It strengthened him, rather than turning him weaker, and Jason remembered that his eyes somehow woke him up from the nightmare before. Sensing the mana inside his eyes, he noticed that the vast liquefied mana was completely used up. He wasn't sure how this could happen, but he had the gut feeling that it had something to do with him not being scared about the pain and torture he endured anymore. Meanwhile, Scorpio was lying next to him, transmitting his hunger to him. Looking at the holographic screen of his quantum watch, he was astonished to see that it was already Friday and he had slept for more than 24 hours. It was 10 a.m. and he made himself ready to go to school, even if he would be late after feeding Scorpio some amber fireflies. He was the only one at home right now, and Jason wasn't sure why, but he didn't want to be alone, which was the reason he was going. It was around 10:40 when his shuttle set off. During his drive to the school, he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique, and he noticed that his soul energy had already reached 9. Considering that Scorpio was now a 3-star wild beast, he only had 1 soul energy left, which was not enough for either Artemis or Scorpio to increase to 4-star wild beasts without Jason losing complete control over them. Jason was still astonished to see that his soul energy reached 9, and it was also the first time for him to notice that his mana core had already reached the 8th novice rank, which shocked him. His physique and mana core size were still at the 8th novice rank even after getting a 33% share from Artemis and Scorpio, but they were indefinitely close to the 9th rank as Jason smiled lightly, thinking about his 2 soul bonds. Jason was holding Scorpio all the time because he needed anyone to rely on at the moment before entering the school gates, as he felt suddenly reluctant to enter the school grounds. After a few minutes, Jason stood in front of the arena, where he saw his classmates from far away. They are practicing martial art techniques. Jason wondered, and he entered the arena, while Scorpio was placed on his shoulder in order to free his hands. Walking into the designated arena for his classmates, someone noticed him walking in. "Oh, it's Jason," the first one said, and all of his classmates turned around at once. Some students immediately started to gossip while looking at him, while other students didn't care about Jason's absence at all. But a few of his classmates stopped their practice, running up to him, not caring about their instructor's orders. Apparently, their teacher was also absent and doing something else, causing Instructor Brian to suddenly appear inside their classroom Monday morning. Nobody knew what was going on and they began to learn a Tier 1 martial art technique that could be used by almost all kinds of weapons. This caused the technique to lose some of its potential, making it into one of the weaker Tier 1 techniques. Nevertheless, the technique was still better than most tierless techniques and the students were quite happy to learn such a technique, which was not easy, as it was difficult to receive permission without relying on the school's authority. Brian knew that one of his students was absent for the whole week, which caused the ambitious instructor to feel slightly angry. He wasn't even told a reason why the second last student was absent and instructor Brian unconsciously labeled him as someone lazy. It was already Friday, and only now he came to school, distracting his diligent classmates, which caused him to become a little bit furious. Students, gather together. Chapter 90 Condensed Killing by Hydesgrain. When everyone gathered, Jason followed suit as they formed a semicircle around the instructor. It was the first time for Jason to look at the instructor with his brown hair and eyes, while his facial features couldn't be considered handsome, at most average. He looked like he was around 30 years old, but in the current era, nobody could really say how old one was from the outer appearance. Opening his mana eyes, Jason noticed that the instructor was at the beginning of the Magus rank with a few drops of liquefied mana inside his mana core, which was quite good. He wondered if this was the average strength from teachers in the Vanguard affiliated school or what exactly the average would be. Maybe only head teachers from the best classes were slightly stronger but still not at the Grand Magus rank, or were they? Jason didn't know it, but his guess was roughly right. Being at the Magus rank was considered the average strength for teachers from the affiliated schools, while Grand Magus ranks were advanced teachers for special courses at the main schools with an extremely high wage and exceptional rights, including privileges for the mana gathering platform that was connected to the mana vein and many more advantages. When everyone was gathered, Instructor Brian asked various questions about the Tier 1 technique they learned through the whole week, called Weaponry Night. The technique focused on close combat with swords, spears, axes, and all variant weapons of it, while daggers, archery, and other similar combat styles were more neglected. One could still use daggers with the Weaponry Night technique, but the effect would most likely be a little bit worse compared to the formerly named weapons. While Jason listened to the instructor and his classmates carefully, and he noticed that his daggers were relatively long and almost comparable to short swords, which would mean he would be relatively compatible with the technique his other classmates learned during the whole week. Brian noticed Jason listening carefully, which reduced his anger gradually, even if he was still slightly annoyed. He was a respected instructor and known for his ambition to teach his students diligently. As long as they tried hard, he would always help them. After he finished asking his students questions, he began to explain some important details as Brian turned to Jason, who listened with sharp ears. Looking into each other's eyes, Brian was astonished to see that Jason had golden eyes, which were relatively uncommon, and he almost immediately began to wonder if he had a special trait. After pondering for a moment, he asked the question he was curious about, even if some would think it was rude to ask their student. Why were you not in class during the whole week? You missed important lessons and your classmates are far above you in terms of understanding the Weaponry Night technique. Furthermore, it looks like your mana core is also the weakest among your classmates. Your teacher told me you would not come back this week because of some circumstances, but the class rankings will start in 10 days and you'll only slow down your classmates like that. Jason frowned slightly, and he would definitely not say the truth about what happened throughout his last week. Somehow Jason didn't like their instructor, as his eyes were unpleasant to look at. As such, he was extremely annoyed, and the anger pain accumulated within caused him to say, "I slept," without anything else. His classmates were also curious about what Jason did during the whole week. They used to comprehend the Weaponry Night technique to their best capabilities. Figuring out that Jason slept, some almost fell to the ground as they leaned closer to Jason in order to hear his answer. Instructor Brian, who was already slightly calmed down, fumed in anger. He is lazy and only wants to slow down his classmates during the class battles. Why was he even accepted into schools? Are we so low now? This was what he thought as he stepped closer to Jason. If you slept, You should have enough energy to spar with me, am I right? With a calm facial expression but burning eyes, Jason noticed that he had probably made a mistake. Jason could only sight as he nodded his head. Not even a minute passed, and both stood opposite each other, while Instructor Brian was generous enough to provide Jason with an advantage of 1 level as he reduced his strength to the 7th novice rank. When their instructor said he would reduce his strength to the 7th novice rank, Jason's classmates were confused. Wasn't that a little bit unfair? Jason is only at the 6th novice rank. Furthermore, he has less combat experience than a veterinarian hunter, while he unfamiliar with a tiered combat technique. This was only until someone cried out in shock, 8th novice rank. How? One of the classmates who stood the closest to Jason shouted, as he scanned Jason's mana core out of reflex. Huh. Everyone's eyes widened as they also released their mana to scan Jason's mana core. The students began to either cry out in shock, rubbing their eyes, doubting their ability to determine the rank of a mana core, causing almost everyone to doubt their capabilities. In everyone's memory, Jason was only at the 6th novice rank a week before. How? What did Jason do during the last week to in order increase his mana core rank by 2 levels? Some of them saw Jason on Sunday and at this time, he was still at the 6th novice rank, and right now they were looking at him with jealousy as they thought Jason received a heaven-like treasure from his family, enabling him to increase his mana core in such a short amount of time. They didn't know that Jason didn't have any relatives left, except the Flays, who were obviously not related by blood with him. The Flays would have never been able to purchase such a treasure. Even if they could, why would they do something like that for Jason? Wouldn't they rather purchase something for their own children? Never would Jason's classmates think that the whole week was more than a little bit horrifying for Jason and that he wanted to die thousands of times. He looked calm right now, but Jason noticed that his instructor wanted to teach him a lesson, which was somehow like a cliché. He had often heard about it when he listened to stories and fairy tales. Instructor Brian noticed the turmoil outside the combat ring, and he also heard them gossiping, causing him to show an astonished expression. Huh. Did he increase his mana core rank by 2 levels in 5 days? Is he a pampered child? ... Well, I just lecture him and afterward, he'll probably learn how to behave. When everyone got into position, Jason took out his 2 daggers from his storage as he got into the foundational stance for fights with dual daggers. Brian noted that Jason's stance was without any flaws as he nodded in approval, giving Jason secretly a few extra points in his mind. The fight started almost instantly and Jason bent down, enhancing his lower body with mana in order to enhance his speed to his maximum capabilities. He was still not familiar with the increase of mana he received after breaking into the 8th novice rank and the additionally amplified amount of strength from Scorpio, which caused Jason to be faster than he initially estimated. Both were only around 30 meters apart from each other and Jason's explosive start catapulted him closer by around 4 meters within a moment. Brian wouldn't stay still, waiting for Jason without moving, and both charged at each other. Only 2 seconds later, both were already in front of each other as Brian swung his tempered wooden longsword at Jason with a quick and precise movement, which Jason was barely able to avoid. He was slightly late to evade it perfectly and he had to use his dagger to divert the trajectory of Brian's sword, when a sudden kick was initiated by him, causing Jason to almost lose his balance. With a jump to the side, he could avoid getting hit frontally, but Jason's leg was still slightly affected by the sudden kick. Meanwhile, Brian was astonished that the student in front of him was able to avoid his combined attack without that much difficulty, as he thought Jason had never really fought a life and death battle. Without combat experience, Jason would have never been able to predict his attack and avoid it without sustaining a serious injury, as the succession of his attack was extremely smooth, without any wasted second. He had restricted his strength to the 7th novice rank, but suppressing his physically tempered body to such a low level was almost impossible, and Brian estimated that even a 9th novice or newly advanced adept ranks would be unable to avoid his attack. Suddenly Jason's mind went into some sort of bloodlust after receiving a hit from the instructor's kick. The pain he felt was not even nearly comparable to the torture he endured a few days ago, but somehow his mind thought this battle was rather a life-and-death fight than a spar when Jason stood up after a roll in order to prevent injuring himself from the side jump. His gentle, sympathetic, and calm eyes that attracted and calmed down many classmates subconsciously changed completely, into some sort of cruel and almost fiendish eyes, without any trace of kindness. It was as if Jason's golden eyes were filled with wrath and the pure desire to kill his opponent. Brian was distracted for a quarter second because he was thinking about his student's quick thinking, when Jason appeared right behind him, without any notice. His hair stood up as he instinctively sensed a thick condensed aura of killing intent behind him, which would eradicate him if he wouldn't do anything right now. Almost immediately Instructor Brian's back was drenched in cold sweat. Fortunately enough, his senses were not restricted, otherwise, he would be dead without noticing what was going on. He had never felt like this and it seemed like he was going to die, if he didn't do something as he immediately released the restrictions, as his whole suppressed might of a Magus rank was released, blasting Jason into the protection mechanism of the combat arena. Jason regained his senses when he was pushed out of the protective sphere, which saved his life. Noticing there was something wrong with his mind, Jason felt the desire to kill Brian, after he received the instructor's hit. This hit caused the subdued anger to intensify, filling his mind, without leaving any trace of reluctance. This caused him to fear himself and he would have to tell his teacher as soon as possible in order to avoid accidents like that to happen ever again. If his opponent wasn't an instructor and one of his classmates, would he have killed them? Jason didn't know and it scared him somehow. Chapter 91 Weaponry Night by Hydesgrain. Brian was still sweating heavily, while his breathing was irregular. He was extremely shocked about what happened when he remembered that he was only sparring with a novice-ranked student. F***K, don't be dead, kid. He just thought when he turned around, only to see that Jason was safe and sound, looking around with a gentle smile, that seemed to be a little bit embarrassed. His classmates were shocked after witnessing Jason almost killing their instructor and they told themselves to not provoke him ever again, even if they seemed to be stronger. If one looked closer, one could even see a small cut at Instructor Brian's neck, that was healing within seconds. Brian ran up to Jason, inquiring about his health and how he felt. The pressure from a Magus rank was nothing to joke about but Jason seemed oddly fine as he smiled at his teacher gently. Did he really emit such a terrifying killing intent just a few seconds ago? Brian shuddered, and he would have to ask the head teacher of this class about the incident. But even so, he had to approve Jason's combat prowess. Even if he was only at the 8th novice rank, he believed with the dense killing intent he emitted, Jason would be able to frighten and surprise even some intermediate adept ranks without much combat experience. Wondering how Jason was able to condense such a thick and terrifying killing intent at such a young age, he immediately disregarded his previous opinion about the black-haired youth being a pampered child or even lazy. Looking at Jason, he wondered how terrifying he would become in the future. A few minutes passed and Jason took Scorpio back on his shoulder who watched Jason's battle from the site. When Jason emitted his thick killing intent, Scorpio's eyes also turned red and he was about to attack Jason's opponent, even if it meant sacrificing his life. Luckily something like that didn't happen and Jason was uninjured thanks to the protective measures from the combat arena. Otherwise, Jason would straight fly into the building walls and break some of his bones. At least that was considered as the best outcome. Every student began to gossip about the spar if one could call it that and it took some time before Instructor Brian had the situation under control. After his surroundings were silent, Brian decided to make teams of 2 to practice the Weaponry Knight's technique. Because their numbers were not even, Brain also participated in the practice but apparently, nobody wanted to train with him, which left Jason and him alone. He was simple as he gazed into Jason's eyes, which were filled with kindness, causing Brain to be slightly uncomfortable before he apologized about his mana outburst. No problem, Otherwise you would be dead right now, Jason said calmly, smiling gently, and Brain shuddered about the youth's calmness, thinking that the youth in front of him was weird. Never would Brain think that Jason endured thousands of deaths and he was now somehow used to thinking about death. It made even Jason himself uncomfortable. After Brain sent him the guide about the Tier 1 weaponry night technique, he read the introduction before Brain explained him all kinds of movements. Jason opened his mana eyes and he could perfectly see the flow of mana during the movements, causing his comprehension to soar to another level. After only a few tries, Jason understood the first sequence, and a few hours later his understanding was most likely deeper compared to the majority, which shocked Brain greatly. A genius, he thought, and he would have to tell that to the class teacher too after his lesson ended in order to nurture such a treasure. Even if Brian was only a normal instructor and not in charge of any particular class, he was still someone who likes seeing someone from lower classes bash the rich and pampered students with a higher starting point. Jason's background or his soul awakening would have to be bad to enter the 75 class of the worst affiliated school, and his mana core rank was also not that great. In the beginning, he thought that Jason's background might still be supporting him, and he found only out that Jason was an orphan after their spar. As such, he wondered how far Jason would be able to go in 10 days with his teachings and maybe the responsible teacher. It was Friday afternoon. After practicing the Heaven's Hell technique inside the shuttle, Jason was reading the weaponry night technique diligently. Meanwhile, Instructor Brian told everything that happened to Mr. Gryle, who got a little bit worried after hearing that Jason condensed one of a more advanced type of killing intent, almost killing Brian. Ugh. Why was I so stupid? Can he handle it himself? Probably not if he is in a taxing fight. But it was at least a good sign that Jason regained his normal demeanor after being hit a single time. If Jason can control the killing intent, it might as well increase his combat prowess for the upcoming class battles. Till also heard that Jason was exceptionally talented in his understanding of the weaponry night technique, which didn't really astonish him. Someone with mana eyes can easily read the mana flow. As such, it's much easier to learn techniques that involve the circulation of mana. Adding Jason's exceptional comprehension ability and the formed killing intent, Till decided to help Jason out with the control of Jason's killing intent during the following week, while the other students would continue learning the Tier 1 weaponry night technique. It was only possible for Jason to condense the killing intent because he endured multiple deaths, which made Till feel extremely guilty, but it could also be seen as an opportunity. Normally, it would take an extremely long time and thousands of arduous battles to condense a simple kind of killing intent. Jason's killing intent was already condensed and extremely terrifying according to Brian, who also condensed a killing intent. Instructor Brian also said that his killing intent could be considered a joke if compared to Jason's. He was also curious and worried about a prodigious student with a high battle talent and comprehension ability. They began to make plans about Jason's progress. In the end, both decided to let Jason continue learning the weaponry night technique in the morning, while the afternoon would be used to understand the killing intent and how to let it emerge and disappear within one's control. Jason was still sitting at home reading through the weaponry night manual, and it looked like he could read, understand, and completely comprehend everything much faster compared to a week ago. Thinking back to the time where he refined his brain, Jason shuddered in fear. But even so, right now it looked like it was extremely beneficial. Not only was his thinking ability much faster, but he could also read and memorize everything within a shorter time compared to before. Jason decided to test out his capacity while reading a few pages of the Beastarium. In the end, he figured out that he only had to read the pages 2 or at most 3 times in order to completely memorize them. Additionally, a single page could be read within 5 minutes at most, including the fact that some special abilities and characteristics were described within these books. This feat alone could already be considered insane, and even if Jason was still anxious about the traumata he received from the pain he endured, he was still alive and received many benefits. This included the continuous passively gathering and refining of mana without having to lift a single finger. Comparing his 3-hour actively absorbing and refining of mana, with continuously doing it without doing anything, Jason estimated that absorbing the mana continuously brought him a cultivation speed increasement between 3 to 4 times, which was truly insane. When he was at home, Jason also tested how beneficial it would be to include his active mana gathering and absorbing. The result was satisfying and his mana gathering speed increased even more. In the end, Jason concluded that it wouldn't be long until he would reach the same ranks as his classmates. He was extremely happy to have received so many benefits in exchange to endure endless pain. Right now only a small trauma was left, which caused the desire to kill his instructor today due to the hit he received from him, and Jason knew he had to fix that. Even so, Jason was confident that his decision was correct. If he wanted to get stronger, he would need to enhance his mana core rank as soon as possible and increase the strength of his soul bonds. The more time passed, the stronger Jason's desire to reach higher ranks became. Almost every day, he thought about his mother and her getting killed 4 years ago, and once he got stronger, he would question the Ceres family who the mysterious heir was that killed his mother. Once found out, he would do something, even if he was still unsure what. Was the mysterious heir resenting his behavior or still behaving like a pampered child who could kill everyone he or maybe she wanted? Would he kill his mother's murderer or not? But right now Jason couldn't afford to get distracted. Instructor Brain showed him the first sequences for the Weaponry Knight technique. After reading through the first few hundred pages with a tempestuous speed, he searched for Greg who could spar with him. While Jason searched for Greg, he found Malia and Gabriella preparing dinner, and it was only now that Jason noticed that it was already dinner time. He decided to help out preparing dinner and to wait until dinner was over in order to ask Greg to spar with him. Jason wasn't much of a talker, but that was definitely not the case with Malia and her mother. Previously Jason thought Malia was rather cold, but that was only her facade because she was gentle and kind. They talked with each other all the time, and it was only when dinner was fully prepared that Mark and Greg came down. Once dinner was over, Jason almost dragged Greg to the courtyard with the combat arena. Normally Greg was titled as Battle Maniac, but somehow it seemed as if Jason was going to dispute his title soon. Greg couldn't accept that, and he restricted his strength to the 6th novice rank only to find out that Jason's mana core reached the 8th novice rank. Jason. 8th novice rank. Greg said while his mouth twitched violently. Wasn't he just too fast? Is he cheating? Chapter 92 Heaven, S-Hell 2nd level by Hydesgrain. It was somewhat difficult to explain what happened to Jason's mana core and how he increased it by 2 levels in such a short amount of time, but even more confusing for him was that the Flays didn't ask him any questions, neither the siblings nor the parents. Unbeknownst to Jason, his teacher called Gabriella and Mark to explain the situation roughly, in addition to his request that they should call him if something were to happen to him. After Gabriella and Mark got to know what happened, they were extremely shocked and worried about Jason. Even Mark was worried about Jason as he grew slowly attached to him, which he would never say out loud. Malia heard her parents talking about Jason, and she was even more shocked than her parents to get to know about his situation, causing her to watch over him when he slept. It was only on Friday that Mark and Gabriella had an appointment when Jason wrote them that he woke up in the morning, and everyone sighed in relief. When he returned home from school everything seemed fine, but they got another call from Till talking about his killing intent and the cause of it. The 3 of them were bewildered and also slightly scared about Jason's health. Nevertheless, when Jason dragged out Greg to the combat grounds, everyone spectated the spar carefully. Jason's teacher told him that it was still unknown when his killing intent would surface. As such, every battle or injury could be the cause, and they were not only worried about Jason but also Greg's health. But their worry was needless because the spar between Jason and Greg took place like always. There was only one important difference. Jason was using his daggers mantled with mana to dull them differently than before due to the knowledge about the Weaponry Knight technique imprinted into his refined mind. His whole demeanor changed compared to before, and his attacks seemed to be more violent. Jason's set of sequences was somehow different, and Greg only noticed that he being overwhelmed over the course of their spar. He couldn't even fight back on the same rank. This couldn't be accepted, and Greg decided to loosen up the restriction from the Soulbond's amplification that enhanced his physique almost to the second adept rank within a second. His mana core restriction was also loosened up and reached barely the first adept rank. Greg's grin was sly, and what he said caused everyone to frown. Now it's fair, right? We have the same mana core rank and both of us get the share of our Soulbond. Ha ha ha. He laughed, and Jason was now the one being overwhelmed. It was still endurable, and Jason was also beginning to grin, finally. Jason only thought with a bright smile blossoming on his face. Previously it nagged Jason that Greg restricted his strength so much in order to fight him head-on. He was still overwhelmed all the time, but now, without the strength of his reinforced Hornbull, Greg would be the one getting overwhelmed while fighting at the same rank. Jason was still unfamiliar with the Weaponry Knight technique, its sequences, and how to perfectly use them. As such, his superior control over mana helped him to distribute his mana accurately without thinking much, and Jason was able to adapt slowly while Greg pressured him. The mana consumption of a Tier 1 technique was much more compared to tireless techniques, and under normal circumstances, a novice rank would only be able to use tiered techniques for 2 minutes at most. But right now more than 4 minutes passed, and only now Jason was about to slow down in using the Weaponry Knight technique because he used up his mana. Greg had also problems providing enough mana for his tiered martial art technique, and he could only sustain it because he was replenishing his mana with the passive mana replenishing technique. The only problem Greg had to go through was that once he focused his mind too much on the mana replenishing process, Jason would immediately use his opening to attack him, which distracted his focus greatly, causing his fighting style to become chaotic. In the end, Greg only won the spar because of his superior Soulbond that gave him a decent boost for his mana core size and the enormous boost in his physique. This frustrated Greg much more than Jason, who was panting heavily because of exhaustion with a radiant smile on his face, as he recalled some flaws during the practice and how to fix them. Jason looked at Greg with gleaming eyes while sweating out of every pore. Greg was frustrated about his fragile concentration during the fight, and the smile on Jason's face looked devilish to him, causing goosebumps to spread all over his skin. Even if his eyes only showed ambition and determination, Greg had a bad premonition. Let's replenish our mana and continue. Please, Greg. Jason looked at Greg with puppy eyes, and the others, who were worried about the two youths' health, began to chuckle. Greg, however, frowned, but he couldn't decline Jason pleading. The following week was intense for Jason, and a few things happened. Scorpio was eating everything that came between its fangs and grew extremely fast. He reached the length of 13 centimeters and broke through his racial limit without any indicators that the maturing process would stop. Scorpio's third molting happened on Saturday, completing his breakthrough into the 4-star Wild Beast rank. He would now occupy 6 soul energies, while Scorpio strengthened Jason's physical toughness and bone structure, which caused it to reach a physique comparable to a normal 9th novice. His mana core size was infinitely close to the 9th rank, and only a paper-thin space was left between both levels. Jason's soul energy reached 10.3 units after Scorpio broke into the 4 stars, finally reaching the required amount to practice the second level of the Heaven's Hell technique. He was only able to reach a soul energy of 10.3 units because Scorpio broke through, and with Scorpio's molting, Jason also broke through. Jason had never thought that after breaking into the 8th novice rank, he would break into the 9th novice rank so soon, but it was all thanks to the passive mana gathering and refining technique that continuously provided him with mana and absorbed it without doing anything at all. Adding on Jason's determination to reach the 9th novice rank before the class battles, he actively absorbed mana into his core, increasing his absorption speed even more. Jason had reached the 9th and last level of the novice rank, which made him quite happy. It hadn't been long since he started absorbing mana into his core, and Jason felt overjoyed that he reached such a high rank in the meantime. Breaking into the adept rank would probably take a while because the obstacle between the ranks was much harder to overcome than the small hindrances on the 4th and 7th level of each rank. Jason had to gather and absorb the needed amount of mana until he reached the required amount to break through without problems, which would take some time as he wanted to prevent the marginal possibility to injure his core due to a lack of mana. His physique was stronger than normal 9th novice ranks, but it was still not enough to overcome the gap between the novice and adept rank, while his mana core size was a little bit less impressive than his physique. Even so, it was still better than a normal 9th novice rank with a weaker soul bond or even without one. It was Saturday evening when Jason reread the 2nd level of the Heaven's Hell technique, also called Helix. From the name, one could almost immediately understand what one had to do, but there were still many different kinds of paths one could take to improve the enhancement the soul energy could achieve. The most common way to practice the 2nd level of the Heaven's Hell technique was also the easiest and safest path. One would have to divide the soul energy equally into 2 parts and intertwine them with each other, forming a firm string that would be slightly thicker than the soul thread one would previously have. As such, the pain while piercing and injecting the intertwined thread into the soul world core would be more painful than on the 1st level. More uncommon ways would be dividing the soul energy thread into more than 2 parts and intertwining them with each other, but the main problem would be that one would have to be extremely careful and braid the threads exactly, without making a mistake. Doing something wrong could be quite harmful to one's soul, as the faulty braid would be rejected by the soul world core and one would have to disentangle the whole thing. At the same time, one would need to focus on controlling all divided parts of the soul energy, because soul energy was like an eel squirming around. To hold control over 2 threads at the same time was already difficult, and doing the same thing with multiple threads would require a lot of focus, exquisite control over soul energy, and much practice which would need a long time to acquire. Jason had exquisite control over his soul energy because he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique 3 times a day for slightly less than 3 months, which was comparable to others practicing it 9 months at the 1st level. But he wouldn't be overconfident and just create multiple threads, as he wanted to avoid possible pain and minimize it. In the end, Jason divided his soul energy into 2 equal parts and intertwined them with each other. Jason made the threads paper thin to avoid pain even more. After he finished braiding the 2 soul energy threads with each other, he injected them into his pebble-sized soul world core. If he had to estimate the increase in pain, Jason would probably say it was double as painful as the 1st level, but comparing it to the torture he endured slightly more than 10 days ago, it was like a mosquito bite. It itched a little bit, but that was it, which caused Jason to sigh in relief. The difference between the 1st and the 2nd level of the Heaven's Hell technique was almost immediately noticeable. The 2nd level was probably around 50% better, probably slightly more, and Jason wondered how much the difference would be with more threads braided together, but that would wait until Jason was confident in not making a mistake while braiding. Chapter 93 Class by Hydesgrain. Jason woke up early in the morning, doing his workout before he washed and changed into the school uniform. It was Monday and today was the first day of the first class battle. There weren't many rules for the first class battles, and it was pretty simple. A class battle would consist of 3 rounds. The first round let the students fight the corresponding number of the opposite class. Once someone was kicked out of the combat arena or unable to continue fighting, it meant this student would be immediately kicked out. One could say it was the first KO round. Following the first round, in the second round, the lower-ranked class would be able to challenge their first opponent, while the third round allowed the higher-ranked class to challenge students. With that, one could prepare many different kinds of tactics in order to win the class battle. It was not only a battle of the physique but also the mind. Teachers wouldn't be allowed to interfere with the class battles, and it was forbidden for them to tell students which opponent they should pick. Learning tactics was important for future hunting sessions because one would probably enter a hunting squad. Communication and a certain degree of overall knowledge were important aspects to hunt in order to survive in the wilderness. Class 75 hadn't learned anything about tactics since they entered high school, but their combat prowess increased by a lot. After the third round finished, the class with the most remaining students within the combat arena left would either stay at its rank if it was challenged or switch the class. Class 75 would fight Class 74 as first. If their class came out victorious, they would become Class 74 and their path could continue. However, if Class 74 won, the other class could continue its path onwards the other classes, while Class 75 would remain exactly the same. While their class was fighting Class 74, Class 73 would be fighting against Class 72, and so on. Each day, 6 classes would fight against each other. Under normal circumstances not many would change in class rankings would occur, with only a few exceptions. Because Class 75 had 25 students more than any other class, it would be unfair once the same rules applied for them as everyone else. With that in mind, 25 students wouldn't be allowed to enter the class ranking. To make it fair, the class voted for the students who should participate in each round of the class ranking. Normally one would pick the best 200 students, but not this year. There were many irregular students in Class 75 which other classes wouldn't know. Jason, for example, was one of them. He was number 224 but tied with Leo Hart, who was number 4 from their class, and his mana core rank increased as one of the only ones during the past few weeks. And not only once nor twice but 3 at that. If one added the first day of school, Jason's mana core rank increased by 4 levels throughout his school life, while others were about to break through after some days. Jason almost defeated a Magus-ranked instructor while fighting at the same mana core rank, and he forced the instructor to release his restrictions. But he was not the only one who was special in this year's worst class. Out of the 40 students that finished the hard assignment provided by their teacher, at least half of them were below near 150. Many weird students with a bad class ranking but some special features like exceptional soul awakenings, high amplification, or special soul bonds with some kind of unique affinities existed. There was also one student with an exceptional comprehension that was probably as good as Jason's or maybe even better. These were mostly special admission students who tended to avoid getting bullied or implicated in quarrels as they choose to stay behind in their ranking. It was more likely that they played low-key, but that wouldn't mean they cowered behind their classmates once the class battles would begin. There was also no use in ranking higher in their current class, and it was only for show because the resources they received were mostly martial art techniques or time at the mana gathering circle. Higher classes would probably receive potions and other things that had to be distributed according to their rankings. But right now it was still useless to rank higher than their classmates. As such, the class decided to let the special cases fight all 3 rounds, while some dejected students who thought they were special got forced to decide whether not to fight at all or to switch with other students. Jason was now near .200 in his class ranking for the time being until the class's battles would be over, and he would be able to fight all rounds once he won the first one. He finished his breakfast as he went on his way towards school, while Greg and Malia used their soul bonds to ride to the main school. Inside the shuttle, Jason practiced the most common path, Heaven's Hell 2nd level. When he was done, the shuttle arrived at the perfect moment and Jason left it after paying up. He walked inside the arena's first floor where his classmates were already waiting on one side, while Jason could also see around 200 pairs of eyes scanning them. Activating his mana eyes, Jason was somewhat astonished. Their mana core ranks were roughly the same as theirs. Not many of them had an elemental affinity mixed into their mana, which meant that they had formed a soul bond with a physical beast. This was good news because Jason's biggest problem in fights were elemental attacks, which he noticed while fighting Leo. He was too easily distracted by his earth spikes and would be easily defeated if he wasn't paying enough attention. Jason roughly knew who he wanted to fight in the first round, which caused him to smile lightly. With his 9th novice rank and the small increase in strength, he could defeat the lower depth student that seemed to be the worst out of Class 74's students. The difference between the peak of the novice rank and the first adept rank was large, around 30% to 50%, but Jason was confident in his own capabilities. Jason could fight Greg head-on if he restricted his strength comparable to Jason's. The only exception was the amplification from their soul bonds. Greg's battle prowess was essential high, but he was not the most intelligent in his family, causing Jason to fight with many tricks against Greg. But who would say something against that if they were to fight a life and death battle? Greg had an amazing soul bond which enhanced his physique by almost 3 levels when he restricted his strength to match Jason's mana core. It was mostly thanks to his soul world's physical amplification. Fighting someone like this head-on wouldn't be that smart, but luckily Greg's speed wasn't highly amplified thanks to the reinforced Horned Bull's characteristics. He only reached the beginner adept rank, which was why Jason could fight Greg. It didn't take long for everyone to gather and the two classes were perfectly divided. Jason found it ridiculous to see that some were even glaring at each other with a competitive spirit. Nobody wanted to lose. Maybe there was a chance to enter the eyes of some higher-up teachers, once the godly combat prowess would be seen. But if they faced reality, not a single teacher with any decent authorities would watch class battles from the lowest classes of the weakest affiliated school. Wouldn't that be a waste of time? Nobody could answer that, and if someone attracted attention with their combat prowess or other capabilities, the head teachers or referees would report it to the higher-ups. Punctual with the school beginning, Mr. Grile walked inside the arena's first floor with a middle-aged average-looking man next to him. Jason activated his mana eyes and noticed that this middle-aged man had only slightly more liquefied mana drops inside his mana core than Instructor Brian, but his mana core size looked even worse than the instructor's one. Class 74's teacher was probably weaker than Instructor Brian, which he found quite amusing. When the students saw their respective teachers walking into the large arena hall, everyone stopped talking with each other. Till was the first one to say something. "Today, we are going to have the first class battle of our first graders. Everyone should be familiar with the rules. If nobody has any questions, we can immediately start." Class 75 already knew that their teacher was impatient, but their opponent was slightly astonished about this. Their teacher was always explaining everything 2 or 3 times until even the slow-witted students could understand everything, but Class 75's teacher wouldn't explain everything multiple times and start right off the bat. Because 200 battles would take place at the same time, they would use training weapons that were dulled and would release some kind of magical neon color to paint the targeted enemy once hit. Once a certain amount of paint was released on one opponent, the arena AI would appoint the combatant as dead. The color would have a certain mana fluctuation, which the AI would detect this fluctuation to determine if one was seriously injured, unable to continue the fight, or dead, and the fight would end immediately. It would be a waste of credits to hire referees, as it was easy to see how heavy one was injured by the amount of color released from the weapon and so on. Saving credits was important for everyone, and referees were exaggerated for such trivial class battles. Probably only in a week or 2, when the fights become more interesting, lower-ranked classes would want to watch their peers' battles in order to accumulate more experience through observations. When that happened, the teachers would take place as referees while explaining the mistakes and flaws made during the battles to their own classes. Jason and the others would have to reach these higher-ranked classes first before they could use their own weapons they were comfortable with. Everyone was ready to start as Jason went to Arena 200, that was the furthest away from everyone. Holding 2 training daggers that were relatively well balanced and 10 small knives one could throw, Jason was ready to fight his opponent. And exactly like he predicted, the student Jason found the weakest was now standing opposite him, slightly hesitating when he entered his fighting stance. The only reason he was hesitating was because of Jason's eyes that looked somehow cold, as if he was his prey, even if he was confident in defeating his opponent under normal circumstances. After getting to know that Jason was not even an adept rank, goosebumps appeared all over the student's body, even though it was illogical. Jason went into his weaponry night combat stance and waited for the starting signal without looking away from his opponent. 3, 2.1. Start. When Jason heard the starting signal, he took out a throwing knife in his hand while his opponent overcame himself, deciding to rush at his enemy with his short sword in his hand, ready to cleave at Jason. Chapter 94 Are We Really So? By Heidesgrain. They were roughly 30 meters apart from each other and he could already detect flaws in his opponent's defense. Jason felt dumbfounded, looking at his opponent. He covered his arm with a quarter of his mana to enhance the movement speed and strengthen his throw when 5 small throwing knives left Jason's hand within 2 seconds. The first 2 knives were deflected by the average-looking youth in front of him, while the third hit the hand, holding the short sword, painting it in a neon color. As for the last 2 knives, one hit Jason's opponent's abdomen while the other one hit his chest. Jason felt weird seeing that. The whole battle was over before it even began, and Jason was more than astonished because he thought his opponent would deflect all knives with ease. But his opponent was apparently not capable to do that, and Jason had to stop his charge abruptly as the eye announced his victory. Jason didn't know that since the beginning his opponent was hesitating to fight him, because of his cold and frightening eyes, causing him to lose the fight before it even started. Now Jason had to wait for his classmates to finish their battles as he looked around, only to see that Class 74 seemed to be extremely weak compared to his own class. It was extremely weird because only 5 minutes later, one could see an astonishing result. Out of 200 battles, Class 75 won 163 battles, which had never happened before. The remaining 37 fights were also not entirely won by Class 74 because the AI announced 11 battles as tied, which meant that both students died. Class 74 had only 26 students left and they looked around as if someone pranked them, but there was no hidden camera and their classmates were splattered with neon-colored paint, indicating their injuries. Till was only smiling after he saw the result, while the average-looking teacher next to him was more than a little bit shocked. His eyes were widened and it was as if he saw a massacre. Turning Class 75's teacher with astonishment, he asked to himself, why is their combat prowess so high? Almost all of them seemed to train similar martial art techniques, but it can't be a tiered technique already, can it? Aren't we supposed to teach them these techniques in the second half of the year? The average-looking teacher stared at Till as if he was a traitor, and Till returned the gaze with a simple, "I didn't cheat." As if he read one's mind. Thinking for a moment, it was really not cheating. The classes were supposed to learn tiered martial art techniques after half a year, but one was allowed to do it earlier. But that was not everything. Even if Class 75 learned a tiered martial art technique, his class should not lose so miserable. They were more than overwhelmed. That was not a battle but a slaughter. What neither Jason nor the average-looking teacher knew was the pressure he gave off on their first day while fighting Leohart caused all students to give the best during the last 2 weeks. The students that were still slagging have changed their mind when Jason almost killed Instructor Brian, as they sensed Jason's killing intent. This caused them to feel like they were suffocating, seemingly supposed to be the next one to die. Combined with the assignment outside the city, all students of Class 75 came to the conclusion that they had to become stronger. To achieve that they would also need resources like more time within Mana Gathering Circle or elemental stones to improve their proficiency with an affinity if they had one. Giving 150% during the last 2 weeks, everyone's achievements were great, and unbeknownst to Jason, they worked hard to ascend into higher classes. Previously they were ridiculed and some of them even bullied because they've entered the worst class. Not now. They wouldn't back off and fight with their sheer will if needed as Jason did. Other classes accepted their low rank and played according to the rules of the top few classes, but why should they accept that? Their will was firm and they wanted to receive not only better resources but also recognition from the surroundings. Jason didn't fight in the second round as the first 26 ranks fought it, and unsurprisingly they crushed everything as their opponent's will to win was completely shattered. Everyone was more than a little bit astonished about the whole course of battles. Class 75 was astonished about their strength, or rather how weak their opponents were, while Class 74's students, or now demoted to Class 75, felt demotivated about being crushed so easily. The whole progress didn't take longer than 25 minutes, including the replenishing of mana. Their teacher took out an emblem with the number 75 out of the pocket and pressed it into the empty hands of the average-looking teacher whose eyes resembled a lost soul. "Where is my emblem?" This threw the black-haired teacher completely from his chair as he shuddered slightly while taking an emblem with the number 74 out of the storage device. While handing out the emblem, he was lamenting about his bad teaching. "If I had only taught my students a tiered martial art technique and not so much about tactics." But even if the former 74th class had learned the same technique as them, Till wondered if they were as good as his students, who gave 150% after witnessing Jason's strength and the brute strength and cruelty of beasts in the wilderness. A single stage was already too much for most students to overcome, and his assignment with defeating beasts 2 stages above one's rank pushed them to their limits if not through. The new 75th class rushed out of the arena, as their teacher was way too embarrassed to face the ridicule from the opposite class. Only 5 minutes later the whole floor was only occupied by the newly advanced 74th class. Suddenly the first few students began to cheer out loud and the other students joined them joyously. Even Jason smiled while he remained silent. Till was watching everything from the site and he didn't say anything about their cheering because they deserved it. It wouldn't take long for them to get accustomed to their wins, as he believed in them, and he almost forgot the reason why they were on asterisks, as he looked at his students. Being reminded about his task, Till didn't know how to feel as Jason could feel a sudden but almost not sensible disturbance behind him. The mana fluctuations were disturbed for a second and Jason turned around, only to see his teacher's complex facial expression as he wondered what was going on. After 5 minutes passed, everyone was silent, as Till snapped with his fingers. Everyone had a trauma about their teachers snapping and it worked fine without mana enhancing the effect. Everyone did a great job, but we are still far from achieving our goal, right? He stopped for a second before everyone roared, yes. There is still at least an hour left until the other classes finish their battle and replenish their mana. Let's not waste our time and pick out the flaws I saw during the fights. Aren't you guys embarrassed to still make so many mistakes with such a simple technique? Not a single one reached the basic mastery except Jason and Seren. Don't even dare to think that I couldn't see the mistakes everyone did. It's a wonder that you guys won this battle. Everyone thought they did a good job, and after getting praised it was obvious for them that there was nothing bad to say, but that was not the case. That praise was only a facade. Are we really so bad? But before they could begin to lament, they were matched up against each other while Till individually picked out one student at a time to fix his flaws. Jason wanted to improve his mastery over the weaponry knight technique. As such, he decided to take on Seren as his opponent. Seren Jiwaya was at the 2nd adept rank while his soul was only slightly bigger than common adept ranks with amplification of more than 1 rank. This meant his soul bond was rather weak, which caused Jason to have sympathy with him. Seren's accomplishment with the weaponry knight technique was almost as well as his own mastery, while Seren couldn't see the mana flow and copy that. In the end, Jason had to accept that Seren's comprehension ability was stronger than his own, which wondered him because his mind was enhanced a few times after he refined his brain. Jason wondered how that could be, and another thing was weird about Seren. Seren's mana was transmuted and different from normal mana, but Jason couldn't detect what kind of affinity or ability it was that Seren received. This made Jason curious, and he questioned himself what kind of background Seren had, because his clothes, accessories, and weapons were extremely expensive, as Jason's mana eyes detected that Seren owned a soul weapon. It was the first time for Jason to see a soul thread from someone else, but when Seren took out his weapon for the first time, he was extremely shocked, as if he was hit by a bolt of lightning. A thread connecting both Seren and the longsword could be seen with his mana eyes, even if it was relatively thin, and Jason became curious. Nobody else knew about this, and his classmates probably thought Seren only owned an exquisite weapon, but he knew the truth. Well, maybe his teacher knew about it because he almost knew everything, but Jason couldn't be sure about that. After Jason got to know that Seren had a soul weapon, he concluded that his soul bond would probably not be a common one and also special. When that thought came into his mind, he pondered for a long time before questioning himself if it was possible for soul bonds to enhance one's brain, which could be answered with a definite yes. Why shouldn't it be possible, if everything else could be amplified by soul bonds? Chapter 95 Did He Just Copy Me? By Heidesgrain. The former 75th class was extremely disappointed in their opponents because they crushed all classes until the 70th with ease, and the previous cheerful atmosphere was kinda weird. There wasn't even astonishment anymore, only disappointment as they asked themselves if these class battles were only there in order for them to improve to fix all of their flaws in the weaponry night technique, or seriously held for all classes to be more motivated and competitive. Jason fought more than 3 hours with Seren and improved his mastery extremely fast, while he was getting slightly overwhelmed by his opponent with his impressive movement sequences. The only thing he was able to do was to defend while retreating, and at the same time, Jason could only search for openings with his mana eyes glued on Seren's legs in order to comprehend what kind of technique he was using. After 3 hours, Jason had imprinted Seren's mana usage into his brain, but he was neither sure what kind of technique Seren was using nor if he could copy this technique without reading the suitable manual. He was still looking relatively fine, even if sweat poured down his back, but Seren looked at Jason as if he was seeing a demon. How can he keep up with me? ... Wait. Is he also here for master? No. That can't be the reason. While Seren and Jason's mastery over the weaponry night technique increased due to the pressure they gave each other, the other students were rather bored after training the weaponry night technique for 3 hours straight, while less than 20 were still determined to find their flaws. After crushing Class 70, they achieved the rights to challenge Class 69, but most students were not as cheerful as before. Will we practice our technique for the whole week once again? They already practiced the same technique for a week, and now they should do the same, over and over again. No. Unfortunately, they missed an important fact. There has never been a master falling from the sky without putting in an effort. If they were not strong-willed enough to train a technique for 2 weeks straight, they could also quit learning how to fight seriously. Days passed, and other than practicing his Heaven's Hell technique, Jason battled against some weak-willed students that had all heard about the famous 75th class crushing all classes with ease. Jason would rather spar with Seren and copy his movement technique than defeating the lowest-ranked member of all classes. The only astonishing fact was that many classmates were achieving the basic mastery of the weaponry night technique after tempering themselves and carefully listening to their teacher's advice. Other than practicing the weaponry night technique, the 40 students that received Tier 2 and Tier 3 techniques from Mr. Grile practiced them in the meantime. Seeing these students training their techniques, the surrounding students looked at their classmates enviously, as the sheer might of these techniques demolished training dolls easily. Unfortunately, higher tier techniques would take a toll on one's body, as the required mana and body constitution were extremely high. They could at most form one attack following the technique description, either with their weapon or mana affinity. A certain girl that picked the Advanced Mana Manipulation Manual, which was a Tier 3 grade technique, created a tidal wave during one of her battles, gushing the perplexed student out of the combat ring. After that spell, she was extremely exhausted, but that didn't matter as she won her round. He and Seren tempered each other and they got somewhat of friends, probably fighting with each other for more than 3 hours on a daily basis told one many information, while the personality could be easily found out during sparring for such a long time. While Jason knew that Seren was hiding someone, he seemed like a nice guy, and Seren also liked Jason, which caused them to become sparring partners. Unfortunately for Jason was, however, that Seren reached the 3rd adept rank and could now overwhelm Jason more easily as the pressure he had to endure during their battles increased exceptionally, which was also somewhat beneficial for Jason. Diamonds can only be polished under high pressure. It was only on Friday, after they were promoted to Class 55th, that the first big hurdles began to appear. The gap of mana core ranks increased by a lot, while their opponents had better soul bonds, indicating a higher amplification. Class 54 for example were their first hurdle, with most students at the 3rd and some of the 4th adept ranks were 1 to 2 ranks above their own average strength. Jason, with his mana eyes activated, could still easily defeat the weakest of each respective class, but the 2nd and 3rd rounds were always more taxing. The battles became closer and it was more difficult to tell who would win, while Till wondered how long they could continue their offensive after they charged through the 60th class, which already astounded him. Increasing one's combat prowess comparable to almost classes 20 ranks higher in a single month was definitely not easy, but the ambition and determination his students showed amazed him, and he would definitely remember that. Jason had some memorable fights. One of them was against a wind affinity user that enhanced his speed, which was normally Jason's best advantage. His opponent was a 3 adept rank with an amplification for agility and a wind affinity which further provided him with an additional boost in speed. Jason couldn't even throw his knives as they were immediately deflected by wind bullets. His weaponry knight mastery was already close to the familiar mastery thanks to Seren, but it was not really helpful in this kind of situation Jason was in, as his speed was just too low to reach his opponent. After defending for some time, Jason decided to try copying Seren's technique, even if it was dangerous. That didn't matter to Jason, because he hated losing more than anything else. As such, he copied Seren's movement technique, which he had imprinted into his mind after fighting with Seren for 4 days. Jason's opponent suddenly noticed that he was becoming slower. No. Jason's speed increased, and not only by a tiny bit. Using half of his remaining mana, which would constantly be replenished, Jason exerted Seren's movement technique. His speed increased by almost 20%, and after further increasing his lower body with mana in order to prevent sustaining any injuries, Jason decided to use every last mana particle inside him in order to follow the mana circulation of his copied movement technique. Jason's speed further increased by 20%, and he could barely fight head-on with his opponent because he was overwhelmed by the sudden increase of speed. It was still noticeable that Jason was slower, but his superior close combat technique overwhelmed the perplexed and stupefied wind ability user, as Jason bent down only to jump to the front in order to injure the wind user's leg. When Jason's opponent looked down, a projectile hit his chin, forcefully pushing his head back. A throwing knife hit him at the most unexpected moment, shocking him. Seren already finished his fight and decided to spectate Jason's fierce fight as he noticed his sudden increase in speed. Somehow the technique Jason exerted seemed way too familiar to him. As Jason poured his whole mana pool inside the skill, Seren cried out, "What?" before he quieted down immediately in order to not attract too much attention. Normally Seren was rather low-key and quiet, so his scream still attracted some attention as the surrounding students looked at him before they saw that Jason won his fight unexpectedly. Even Till was astonished about Jason's sudden boost in speed, as he couldn't remember that to have seen him learning or exerting a tiered movement skill. Jason was one of the last ones to finish his battle, and Till spectated his whole battle. Over the whole course of the spar, it was obvious that Jason was on the losing side, even if he gave his everything, but the sudden usage of a tiered movement skill shocked not only his opponent, who was taken by surprise, but also him even more so, as he was more than a little bit familiar with this technique, as his eyes widened. The only thing he could sense was Seren screaming out, and that Jason wasn't able to use the whole potential of this technique. Looking at Seren, many different kinds of emotions and thoughts appeared in his mind, but focusing on the present circumstances, it was obvious that Seren was extremely shocked while looking at Jason. Seren was unable to think clearly, and the thought that Jason could have copied his technique caused him to shudder violently. Did he just copy me? He thought desperately while thinking about the low possibility, when a sudden memory reappeared in his mind. Didn't Master say that Jason has mana eyes? Has he copied the flow of mana over the last few days? Is that even possible? Thousands of thoughts ran through his mind, but there was a simple solution for Seren to figure out whether Jason copied him or not. Just ask him. He told himself, and Jason was slowly walking out of the combat arena when Seren could see Jason's pale face. "Jason, are you okay?" Seren asked worriedly, he himself had trained his movement skill for multiple months until he reached his recent velocity, not even Jason was aware of. Jason was just forceful using the movement technique without any real understanding, which was quite dangerous. Till noticed Jazzo's condition and appeared in front of both students while taking out a low-grade energy replenishing reagent from his spatial storage. Pouring the content into Jason's mouth, he immediately felt better. Jason could stand up again, but he still felt exhausted as his body grumbled like he was starving for weeks. Your body used up your stored nutrition to regenerate the life force it converted from the lack of mana. Don't use techniques you don't know, idiot. Mr. Grile explained. After that, Jason starved down some food he had in his storage space while Seren was scanning his body for the whole time. Jason was embarrassed as he asked what's going on when Seren almost exploded. Did you copy the floating sky movement technique? Seren asked curiously, and involuntarily he said the name of his movement technique, which he wasn't supposed to do. Ah, that's the name. Sorry Seren, hee. I didn't know how to win otherwise. Chapter 96 Master by Hydesgrain. Ah, that's the name. Sorry Seren, hee. I didn't know how to win otherwise. That was a lie, but he couldn't tell Seren that he was too scared to use his killing intent, which was still not easy to control. That was a matter of his pride, even if he didn't have much. Seren looked suspicious at Jason and wondered how much of his family's treasured floating sky movement technique he copied. Thinking back on the time he fought Jason, Seren concluded that he only made use of the most basic level of the floating sky technique without trying his utmost with it. Sighing in relief, he couldn't help but jolt, thinking about the possibility of Jason copying more than that. Once his brother, or even worse his father, found out, it would be horrifying. Looking at Jason, who was still slightly with serious eyes, he had to do something. Jason, I think we have to talk about the last battle and your ability to copy techniques by looking at the mana circulation. Till was still standing next to them and nodded his head while seriously looking at both of them. If Jason just copied every technique he wanted to, it could be extremely dangerous for his own health. But that was not everything. If he copied techniques from big clans, guilds, families, sects, kingdoms, and multiple other monstrous organizations, it was more likely that Jason would be killed in the future before he could grow. Who would give a stranger the most treasured techniques a family had, which they only gave their most promising offspring or disciples, as copying them was not easy with the secret inscription inside the manuals. These inscriptions had hidden meanings inside them in order to enlighten the reader. Nobody. And listening to Seren, Till was sure that Jason copied the special movement skill floating sky, even if it was rough and only in the pre-origin state. Before they continued their talk, they went to a separate room, while the others replenished their mana for the next class battle. Till lectured Jason for quite some time, and Seren tried persuading him to not use the floating sky skill anymore. But something seemed suspicious to Jason when Till and Seren talked to him. It seemed like both knew each other for longer than 1 month, because Till explained things about the floating sky technique and its uniqueness in order to show him how dangerous it would be to continue learning it. Because the technique was so unique, Jason would like to learn it more in depth, but from Till's explanation, it seemed like it was really dangerous. If this technique had similarities to other skills, Jason would have continued learning it, because he would still be able to say he comprehended the additional sequences by himself. Till knew almost everything about the floating sky movement technique, and Jason was growing more and more suspicious. In the end, he accepted the fact that he was not allowed to use the floating sky skill, but Jason grew more curious about their relationship as he asked, "Are you two acquaintances?" Jason straightforwardly asked. While Till was about to create a story to cover the truth, Seren was only 14 years old and still green behind his ears, and acted naively in front of Jason. "Yes, he is my master," Seren acknowledged, and before he looked at his master, Till was shocked about Seren's naivety. "Did I teach him wrong?" And upon seeing Till's facial expression, Seren noticed that he did something wrong, and an "oh" escaped his mouth. Jason only looked at Seren and then his teacher. He was only slightly astonished about this revelation because he concluded something similar, but it was still different than he had thought before. He was an emotional youth before, but when it was important, his rationality dominated his mind. Since he had refined his mind and overcome the torture from the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit, his train of thoughts had become much clearer and less emotional, which helped him a lot. Why are you two even here on Asterix? Shouldn't Kanir have a better environment to refine and absorb mana in order to increase one's mana core according to the mana density? Both of you are not hiding from someone and openly showing off your soul weapon and hundreds of martial art skills, whether they are unique, special, or tier 3, it doesn't make sense that nobody is wondering about both of you, except me. When Jason said soul weapon, both Seren and his master were astonished because they hadn't thought that he would be able to differentiate a normal graded sword from a soul weapon, which was not easy. And wouldn't most people think that rather than a soul weapon, one would have a mana weapon? The difference between normal graded weapons and mana weapons was the enhancement in sharpness, toughness, and some particular even had an amplification in elemental attacks. If one attacked an evolved beast with a grade 1 sword, this weapon would most likely break, or if one was lucky, get repelled. A low grade 1 mana weapon would still be able to pierce through the defense of evolved beasts. With a wand, which was also a mana weapon, elemental attacks could be enhanced, and a simple fireball, for example, could double in its might, once the wielder applied everything correctly. While mana weapons were already special, soul weapons were the same as mana weapons with the addition of the connection with the wielder and the adjustment in strength. As such, the wielder could handle the impact and mana consumption, while the soul weapon would grow with its contractor. Soul weapons could not be used by other people, because these weapons were crafted and forged with the contractor's soul in them. Not even reforging would extinguish the connection between both of them. Mana and soul weapons couldn't be easily distinguished, and it took many experts multiple years of arduous effort to learn certain eyesight techniques in order to be able to distinguish between both. As such, Till immediately adjusted his previous statement about Jason's mana eyes in his mind, while Seren was looking at him with widened eyes and an opened jaw. This time, Till was the one to answer Jason's question. He wouldn't omit or skip many facts because he wanted to tell Jason about it even if he wouldn't ask. He was curious about Jason, which was also the reason he helped him out with the splitting mind technique. Maybe Jason could participate in his mission if he wanted. He was slightly clueless about how to begin, so Till just started. How do I begin? First of all, you are right about everything you said. We are not hiding, and to be honest, both of us are Kanir's citizens and not from Asterix, which you already figured out. I'm curious how you found out about Seren's soul weapon, but that's not very important. There are multiple reasons we are here, but it's mainly for Seren to see how humans live within the archipelago and the difference of strengths all around humanity's territory. Compared to the citizens of Kanir, the strength one can see here is almost laughable, and humans have not suffered mana beast outbreaks, yet. That's mainly because of the weak beasts we have here, and Guardian ranked beasts are already considered the stronger foes, which is a joke on Kanir and the other mainland. If a single powerhouse would enter the forbidden areas here, they could easily annihilate these foes and prevent Guardian ranked beasts to appear, but why is nobody doing that? I don't know if you care about that, but I want to enlighten you. The answer is simple. Guardian ranked beasts are guarding magical treasures, which need multiple years in order to grow. Once these treasures are ripe, these powerhouses come over to pluck them. Guardian ranked beasts could be labeled as workers for these powerhouses, protecting these treasures until the stronger individuals come back to pluck them. As you may know, the strongest humans on Asterix are at the Grandmagus rank, and only a few tens of thousand at that. Most Grandmagus on Asterix or the archipelagos are old, and one could say they're retired. Youths with enough potential won't stay on the small islands, which are only used to exploit everyone. The gap between the future development of someone within the archipelagos compared to citizens on Kanir is vast. There are only a few things Kanir and the islands have in common. First, our origin is the same, and we are all from the same race. Second, we all have the same enemies, which are the invading intelligent races and the beasts all over the wilderness. And third, every human underwent a soul awakening and it's still not known how to influence these awakenings in order to improve them. The awakening of a soul is not discriminating about humans' origins, while the chances are only slightly higher to awaken better souls if one is from a great background, which might not even be true. As for our mission, wait. Jason interrupted Till, and upon looking into Jason's eyes, which looked cold, he noticed that something was wrong. You want me to say that millions of people have to die and suffer because some powerhouses want to keep their treasures for themselves? Are they even humans? Why don't they just clear a few islands for all humans, foster and fertilize some other islands to play gardener or something like that? Why do the weak have to suffer like that? Where is their humanity and kindness? Luckily, they were in a separate room, while Seren shuddered in fear. Till looked astonished at Jason's condensed killing intent outbreak. He really hates the rule of the jungle that much. Till was raised up by loving families, and the only time he really suffered was when he ate the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit while this memory was still imprinted into his mind. Seren was already familiar with some feeble killing intent, released from his master to show him how killing intent feels like, that he won't be scared once he fought with bloodthirsty beasts or other human bandits. However, the killing intent Jason released was multiple times stronger and more condensed compared to the most basic killing intent his master demonstrated him. Taking a few steps back, cold sweat poured down his back as he fell on his butt, while his eyes trembled. Is that really Jason? Chapter 97 Truth by Hydesgrain. Is that really Jason? Was the only thought in Seren's mind, while he pulled himself further away from him. Jason's golden eyes were ice cold, and it felt like they were penetrating every pore inside his body as Till snapped with his mana-enveloped fingers to distract Jason and Seren. Jason, calm down. It's not like we are the perpetrator, right? This single sentence calmed him down, but he wanted to protest about this statement, as he knew that Till could kill Guardian-ranked beasts when Till answered his unspoken question. What do you think happens, if I kill these Guardian-ranked beasts? I'm not suicidal, you know. Once I kill the protectors of the developing magical treasure, I'll be hunted for good. The islands are somehow similar to the garden of some big families, and they divided them amongst each other. You said you want to clear a few islands. Which one do you want to clear, and what about the magical treasures on the other islands? Who receives what? What about the newly developing lush islands? Do the big families have to divide their own island after some Samaritan offered their island for humans to live on? I can see that you hate the weak being used in order to strengthen the strong, but with your strength, you can't do anything against it, even if you want. Even I am too weak to fight against these big families, which is the sad truth. These families survived the mana outbreak, and some of the ancestors are still alive. I'm 56 years old, and my mana refinement and absorbing talent can be considered pretty good, but these old gramps and hags lived for 300 years, even if their aptitude is worse than mine. Don't you think they have some tricks hidden in their sleeves? Quote. To tell you the truth, I don't really like how these big families treat people from the lower society, even if it is only a single noble rank. They even divided Canir according to their strength, and almost everything is distributed by them, which is kinda gross. But don't get me wrong, not every big family, clan, sect, and so on is bad. You can tell from Asterix that even if the hierarchy is horizontal and unfair, other islands have it worse or even better. Belgra, for example, is one of the bigger islands with 400 million citizens, and they have divided their island into 5 parts. While 2 parts are solely used for humans, it allows beasts below the unblemished rank to stay within their borders. It is relatively peaceful as pacifistic humans begin conversing with more intelligent beasts. Maybe they threaten them with their annihilation, but it is nevertheless relatively peaceful in these 2 particular parts. While the remaining sections are still infested from beasts, there is still a better environment for humans, because only hunters, military, and trainees enter these 3 sections. One section has only beasts below the magical rank and the other two are infested by all kinds of beasts. The previously named peaceful parts are used for humans that don't like to fight and try to live in harmony with others. They want to work hard to produce all kinds of devices, garments, equipment for hunters and so on rather than risking their lives to fight with beasts. Till looked extremely proud when he said all of that and a premonition emerged in Jason's mind. Belgra belongs to your family, right? Jason questioned with slight hesitation. Seren calmed down and looked at Jason fearfully, not knowing what to do, while Till's proud expression vanished. He cleared his throat slightly embarrassed as he said, "That's partially true. The Grail and Jiwaya family govern Belgra together and it was only because we are two large families with more peaceful thought than others, that we achieved peace within two parts on Belgra." Jason found out many information at once and he finally understood why Seren was so different compared to all of his other classmates. Furthermore, he figured out why Till was so strong. Looking at Seren, he asked, "You didn't fight me with your full strength, right?" Jason concluded this, but there was still a ray of hope that he was wrong. Seren was still scared about Jason's previous killing intent outbreak, but upon looking into Jason's eyes, his fear vanished and he only nodded his head after a short moment. Damn, Jason cursed until roughly understood what youth in front of him meant. To be honest, your combat prowess is above average, but only if you look at Asterix's common average and your current mana core rank. You've already noticed during today's battle that you were completely overwhelmed, and only thanks to your exceptional observance and your ability to copy the floating sky technique allowed you to surprise your opponent. Considering your peers in Syro City, your strength is barely average, which includes only the students who go to high school. I excluded heirs with home tutoring and so on because you're probably unable to even hit them once, as they reached the expert stage with the help of certain magical plants and reagents, while only being slightly older than you. When he heard Till lecturing him about the average strength of Asterix alone, Jason frowned. He knew that his soul bonds were weak and his mana core rank was also below average in Syro City, but his combat prowess. He found himself pretty good considering the small number of techniques he had. Suddenly a thought emerged from his mind. Mr. Grail. If I learn more martial art techniques similar to the floating sky movement technique, I can increase my combat prowess by a huge margin, right? Quote. Well, only increasing the variety of your martial art techniques won't be enough because your innate strength is too weak with the peak of the novice rank at the age of 14. Considering that I saw your aptitude for mana absorption multiple times, I can't figure out why your mana core rank is still so low. Jason was a little bit dejected after finding out again that he was still weak, even if his strength increased by a lot when he was reminded that his teacher hadn't told him the purpose of coming to the 6th affiliated Vanguard School on Asterix Island. Mr. Grail, you wanted to tell me why you and Seren came here on Asterix, or rather Syro City. Till had to think for a moment what exactly to reply because he didn't want to utter any secrets. Looking at Seren, he received a look, saying something like "I don't mind," as he started. We have multiple reasons to come to Asterix and they have something to do with Cryo City and Seren. I'm not sure how much I should tell you, but we will capture Seren's second soulbond here, as soon as the time comes. The beast we are searching for is rare and only gives birth to offspring every few years, but it is important to get this beast due to certain circumstances. Previously you said that the mana density should be much higher on Canir, but that's only partially true. It's rare to find such a stainless mana vein somewhere, and outside the dome, the mana density is still roughly the same as on Canir. If you look at Seren, you might think it's a lie, because of his low mana core rank, but he has his own reasons. Furthermore, I also wanted to teach a class once in my life and experiment how fast I can improve the combat prowess of the worst class in the worst affiliated school. I was just curious. Jason concluded that their main task was to wait for Seren's second soulbond to be born as he nodded his head. Once that was over they would leave. Listening to the last part, Jason wondered if his teacher was really 56 years old or a child. Till decided to become a teacher, just because he wanted to, and additionally he gave out extremely rare techniques only because he was curious. Weird. Jason could roughly comprehend why Seren's mana core was so weak compared to the average strength of Canier's citizens. After Jason looked at Seren's mana core, he also had a good view on his constitution, which surprised him, as Seren's mana channels seemed different than they should have. The transmuted mana in Seren was straightening and smoothing the twisted and crumbled mana channels. As such, Jason thought that Seren formed a contract with a unique soul bond which were capable of healing damaged mana channels. That also meant Seren was only able to use mana after he contracted his first soul bond. Seren remained silent after Till said that he had his own reasons for his mana core rank, but Jason could see the frustration in his eyes. He understood this frustration as his family was probably not happy about Seren's mana channels, which seemed to be almost crippled. He wasn't sure if Seren had siblings, but even his peers were probably similar to bullies after noticing that they were stronger than him. But how should Jason know something like that, as he wasn't sure how competitive big clans were amongst each other? Seren hadn't told him anything, and Jason didn't mind that either. He was only an acquaintance or maybe even a sparring partner to Seren, but not someone he knew for years. Trust had to be earned throughout a long friendship or important events that showed one's sincerity. Chapter 98 Final Replacement by Hydesgrain. During their talk, Jason found out that the two of them would only stay on Asterix until Seren's second soulbond would hatch, which was roughly 4 to 6 months from now. Until then, both of them would stay in Syro City and play teacher and student, while Seren would improve his strength and mana core rank. Mr. Grile would most likely just continue playing teacher, because he asked Jason to keep their identity a secret. Jason didn't mind that, and getting to know how long the two of them would stay on Asterix gave him the chance to receive more benefits from them. Considering the fact that he already got a unique skill that was more difficult to obtain than most Tier 3 techniques and equivalent to blessed skills without much effort made Jason expectant. The fact that Mr. Grile gave him resources worth multiple 100-star notes was neglected by Jason because he had to endure 60 hours of pure torture, which felt like years to him. It was not like he liked holding grudges, but he saw the cultivation resources he received from his teacher to perform the first level of the splitting mind technique as compensation for the torture he endured because Mr. Grile informed him wrongly. Maybe this mindset was wrong, but there was nothing he could do against it. He was not an exceptional greedy person, but after figuring out how important movement techniques were, he was obsessed with the thought of obtaining such a technique. Teacher. Is there a way for me to receive tiered skills for movement, defense, attack, support, and so on without achieving a certain number of human glory points? I heard that schools give out missions and reward students with merit points. I think they're called Lace Point for the Vanguard School. How can we obtain them? I need a movement technique as soon as possible to improve my strength. Jason licked blood and he wanted to get stronger. Who cared about the big families with their wealth and prodigies from great backgrounds? He didn't, and the only thing he wanted was to get stronger in order to live free without anyone obstructing him. Furthermore, there was the hunch that he might even be able to change something about humanity's current obnoxious society that disgusted him. While Jason was deep in thoughts, his teacher answered him, causing him to come back to his senses. Oh. I probably forgot to tell everyone that each promoted class rank will give you guys 2 lace points, while each win after a streak of 10 will give out 5 lace points. Because you guys won against class 54, which is 21 wins a row, 75 lace points will be added to your school profile. Lace points can be exchanged with credits, while 1 lace point is worth around 20.000 credits, but I don't recommend you change them. You can't change credits into lace points, and in my opinion they are worth much more, if you take a look at the school shop later. Sighing, their teacher added, it's already a wonder that you guys came so far, but I think class 53 will end the first class battle for us. Class 53 has some quite unique students, while their teacher is sly. Nevertheless, everyone astonished me, and it changed my view on Asterix top schools quite a bit. getting to know that they already obtained some lace points, and Jason was quite pleased. Maybe he would be able to purchase a movement technique soon. It was now time for the three of them to leave because their battle against Class 53 would start soon. When Jason went into the combat arena, he could already see Class 53 with their teacher, and the sight was quite shocking. Out of 200 students, more than half of them looked like bulldozers to Jason. Their sheer muscle mass was excessive, and they didn't look like bodybuilders but rather mountains of muscles. Jason questioned himself if they consumed steroids or other drugs to pump their muscles. Looking at their mana core, he was astonished to see that their mana core was only at the first or second adept rank, while the size was slightly larger, probably between the second and third adept rank, while there was no transmuted mana, which indicated that they formed a soul bond with a physical beast. Physical enhancing beasts amplify mana not as much as other beasts, and seeing that their mana core size was 2 ranks above their initial rank, indicated that all of them formed contracts with evolved beasts. Their strength was probably the same strength as Greg's with his reinforced horned bull. This shocked Jason, but he wasn't the only one because his classmates were looking at the 1.8+ meter tall human bulldozers like they were monsters. He wondered how so many of the same kind could be together in a class, and it was only later that he found out that initially these large groups of bulky youths were placed in different classes. However, the teacher listened to their pleading and placed them together. All of these bulky youths came from the same city, and it was rare to see so many youths from the same school having roughly the same amount of soul energy. To add another odd fact, they formed a contract with the exact same beast. That was a fierce mountain ape, an intermediate evolved beast. Apes are considered the perfect beasts to share physical strength because they enhance every body part, while other beasts focus their amplification on a certain area, and Jason immediately got a bad premonition. The battles started and the bulldozer youth's eyes turned red as they entered some kind of berserk state, which was apparently an ability they inherited from their soul bond. It didn't take long for Jason's classmates to be defeated, while only 90+ students were left standing after a single minute. Meanwhile, Jason fought with a water affinity user that seemed to act rather defensively with a small shield around her. Sometimes she shot water bullets, but their strength was rather weak. Thanks to Jason's exceptional eyesight, he could avoid them very easily without much effort. Jason wasn't concerned about his mana consumption while he pressured the female water practitioner, whose mana core was extremely large compared to her physical strength. It wasn't rare to see someone utilizing the passive mana replenishing technique, and Jason was aware of that fact. As such, he pressured his opponent even more, and she had to concentrate on the fight against Jason fully in order to prevent getting overwhelmed within a second. Losing focus for a short moment would decide over victory and lose, which the water practitioner noticed after fighting Jason for a short time. Throwing knives would be easily deflected by a thin water shield, but she didn't calculate her mana consumption into account, which was a big mistake. After Jason threw all of his knives, he was already at advantage. He used a quarter of his mana to enhance his lower body and circled around her while stabbing and slashing with various angles and different velocities. Jason could have ended the battle sooner, but he acted to save when the female water user could not continue fighting after 4 minutes passed. Coming out victorious, he left the combat arena, only to see that only slightly more than 40 classmates were left alive. Because they could decide who to fight, Jason looked around to find some weaker students of Class 53, and he found another water user with a second adept mana core rank, while its size seemed slightly smaller compared to his previous opponent. The female water user probably contracted a better soul bond which amplified more of her mana core size. While fighting, Jason found out that his opponent was not playing defensive while operating his water, rather he attacked Jason frontally, with an axe in his hand. Jason sneered, thinking about the stupidity of some students, fighting a dagger's wielder with a heavy axe. Okay, Jason smiled on the inside as he predicted that the water affinity user would most likely try to prevent him from avoiding the axe with water bullets or some thin walls. Without many surprises, Jason's prediction was correct, as a thin water wall erupted next to him, while he was a frontal attack from 2 water bullet. His opponent was already about to turn to the left side, where he predicted Jason to jump to while pulling his axe back, as Jason did the exact opposite. The water wall next to him was roughly 2 or 3 centimeters thick and not even stable enough to block frontal attacks. It was only a bluff to pressure him and force Jason to make a sudden decision, causing him to jump straight into the attacking axe wielder. But Jason was aware of his opponent's scheme and additionally, that he most likely used up roughly half of his mana in order to erupt the water wall and shot 2 water bullets at the same time, which played into his hands, because the focus one had to use to do all of this at the same time was also not to be neglected. In his mind, Jason praised his opponent. However, that didn't change his decision, as he sliced at the water wall before he jumped through it while getting a little bit wet. Water entered his eyes but he forced them to stay open, as he could see the blurry outlines of his opponent who probably looked at him quite shocked, with his axe already raised high. Throwing 3 knives in a row, the water user could deflect the first with another water bullet. However, his focus was completely in disarray as he had to lower his axe as fast as possible to deflect the remaining 2 knives that flew straight towards him. This gave Jason enough time to enhance his lower body and appear behind his opponent to kill him with ease, as he pierced into his neck, which ended the whole battle. However, Jason was dissatisfied with his own speed after he remembered what kind of acceleration the floating sky techniques provided even at the most initial proficiency. Staring at Seren's combat area, he felt jealous. Seren was already done, and seeing Jason's look caused him to smile dryly as he figured out why Jason looked so sad. In his opinion, it was completely understandable. He would probably feel the same, and he felt a little bit guilty after indirectly taking away a treasure right in front of Jason's nose. The third round was embarrassing as Jason was overwhelmed by a 3rd adept rank with 5th adept physique, while only 8 students of class 54 survived, with one of them being Seren. The first class battles ended for their class after the first week, but their achievements were nothing to be ashamed of. Chapter 99 Weightless Steps by Hydesgrain. Jason wasn't all that sad that the class battle was over for them, rather than that he was expecting to do some missions in order to be able to purchase a tiered movement technique. He immediately entered the school website before he clicked on the section for lace points, where many columns like a trading section, mission board, purchase, sell could be seen. What made him curious was the sell section, because he might be able to sell something he owned. However, he became disappointed because the items the school would purchase were extremely rare and the price was below average in his opinion. Looking at the purchase section, however, was the complete opposite to him, as he was immediately dumbstruck. Thousands of manuals, magical plants, weapons, armors, accessories, and so on could be purchased, only the price seemed slightly high, compared to his 75 points. He wanted to know what types of Tier 1 movement techniques he could purchase. Only around 100 techniques could be seen, and even the cheapest of them would cost 500 lace points. 10.000.000 credits if converted, but in the end it was probably more, considering that it's harder to obtain lace points. This frustrated Jason, and he closed his holographic screen while his mood hit rock bottom. He had 75 points, but even the worst Tier 1 technique was extremely expensive, and wouldn't satisfy his needs. It was Friday afternoon, and Jason was walking to the school gates to enter the shuttle with a sour facial expression indicating his frustration when Seren ran after him. "Jason. Wait a moment," Seren said, and Jason stopped in his track, shaken out of his absent-minded walk. Is something wrong?" Jason asked, because Seren looked somehow serious and hesitant. Seren was similar to Greg and didn't have many friends. He was extremely intelligent since young, but his malfunctioned mana channels caused him to be a disgrace to his family, as he was seen as a nuisance. Sparring with Jason for a whole week was different, and he felt accepted around him, even if he couldn't show his true combat prowess all the time. Because Jason would hide his master's secret and not train the floating sky movement technique anymore, Seren felt bad, and he had a short discussion with his master about it. Clearing his throat, he began, "Jason. Thank you for covering our secret. My master and I want to gift you something in order to say thank you. You are not allowed to decline. I don't know what happened, but Master feels bad about something he apparently did to you, and I feel also guilty because you felt the might of a secret movement technique. Now we force you to stop practicing it. Must be frustrating. Our present will help you increase your combat prowess. Maybe I don't have to hold back next time, hahaha. Seren's silly laugh was annoying and he felt embarrassed as he sent him a file before running back to the school, leaving an astonished Jason alone. Received wasn't sure what to do right now, but he got a notification that his shuttle was waiting for him. Entering the shuttle, he opened the file sent from Seren. Tier 1 weightless steps. Huh. Jason was astonished to see that Seren sent him a movement technique. Was Seren really sorry that he sent him the Tier 1 skill manual, or was it his teacher's guilty feelings? Jason didn't know the reason, but after finding out that Seren and his teacher came both from big families that governed an island with over 400 million citizens, he thought that a Tier 1 skill might not be worth much for them. Nevertheless, Jason was still grateful for this opportunity. He thanked Seren sincerely and even wrote a message to his teacher in order to thank him sincerely. While the 14-year-old Seren seemed quite happy, Mr. Gryle messaged him. "It's okay, you deserve it," which confused Jason. It was not like Jason did something to deserve that, or did I? Without really thinking about his teacher's answer, he messaged Seren. "If you need help with picking your second soul bond, I might be able to help you out. I'm pretty good at picking beasts with high potential." There was not much meaning behind his words to Seren, who looked a little bit confused at the holographic screen, but to Jason, it was quite dangerous to tell anyone about his ability to distinguish between a beast's mana core purity. At least until now, Jason had reviewed his Mana Eyes abilities over and over again, but he couldn't figure out their limits or what exactly they could do. Somehow, he innately knew roughly what they were supposed to do, but it was still difficult for him to comprehend it and express it into words or actions. In the end, he decided to stop thinking about his eyes ability with the conclusion that he could detect almost everything with them, including the purity of beasts, which was probably their potential. Furthermore, Jason knew that without injecting mana into his eyes, he could intimidate opponents with them without even trying. Adding his released killing intent, even someone with a slightly higher mana core rank than him would be horrified by him. Remembering the battle against Leohart, Jason knew that his Abyss effect was only the amplification of this intimidation effect thanks to mana, or at least that was what he thought. Jason was almost entirely clueless about his eyes, and thinking about it frustrated him a lot. He was expectant to open the Weightless Steps manual to learn a movement technique that Jason was allowed to practice without anyone hindering him when his soul world began to shake slightly. Entering his soul world, he noticed that the thick cocoon around Artemis was slowly starting to become thinner as sweat drops began to appear on Jason's forehead. "Darling, I'm not ready yet," he thought, and from the diminishing speed he saw, Jason could estimate that Artemis would finish her evolution in 1 or at most 2 weeks. F*** was the only thought in his mind, and he decided to read through the Weightless Steps manual later before he went closer to his soul world core. Over the whole week, Jason's soul energy reached 11.1 units while he used up 10 for his soul bonds. Considering that Artemis would at least reach the awakened rank, he would have to speed up his increase of soul energy by a few folds, which was extremely annoying. But right now, he couldn't be calm as he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique with a normal helix formed by 2 strings. Without being able to calm down, practicing a higher difficulty of his Heaven's Hell technique could be considered suicidal due to the dangers, as Jason was rational enough to discard this stupid thought without looking back. He estimated that his soul energy increased by 0.1 or 0.2 daily right now, which was astonishing, considering the fact that Jason's innate soul energy was only 11.1 units right now. Normally others would need 3 days for that, but Jason's insanely fast reproduction of soul energy was the cause for this astronomical speed. The increase of one's soul energy was exponential instead of linear, and Jason was confident that it would only take 1 week time, with his current speed, to have a consistent increase of 0.2 soul energy per day. This meant in 2 weeks, Jason would be able to increase his soul energy to 13.2 at the worst. Deducting the soul energy used for Scorpio, he would have 7.2 soul energy for Artemis. If Artemis had a soul energy of 11 units at the bare minimum, Jason would receive an amplification of his own soul energy of 2.3. Calculating everything, Jason noticed that his soul energy would still be short of around 1.5 soul energy units. This calculation was the best-case scenario, including the fact that Scorpio could enter the 5-star Wild Beast rank in the meantime and the high possibility for Artemis to have an innate soul energy of more than 11 units. Jason didn't like his soulbonds reaching a higher soul energy than him because of the marginal chance that they hated him, for whatever reason, causing them to break out of the soulbond contract or even worse. Everything was possible even if Jason was confident in the thick connection with his soulbonds. He adored them more than anything. Even Greg, who became his best friend over the last few weeks, was not as important for Jason as his two little companions. Jason felt extremely pressured by Artemis' surprise event, and before he could continue his train of thought, the shuttle arrived. Leaving the shuttle, he decided to eat dinner with the Flays, and everyone noticed that he was absent-minded, which happened quite often over the last few days. Greg wasn't concerned about Jason as he had to think about his own combat prowess because their own class battles also started. Only now understood the strength of his peers, which was nothing to scoff at, even if his combat experience was superior. Malia had it slightly easier, but she would have to leave her home soon for an expedition mission from the school as one of her exams, which made her somehow expectant and anxious at the same time. A single mistake could kill her and the whole expenditure team, which was quite some responsibility for a 16-year-old kid. Gabriella and Mark looked at the youths with worry, but there was not really anything they could do to help them. Their own strength was at most above average, considering that both of them had entered the Magus rank, but that was it. It was only that their beast-capturing ability was superior to others, which made them slightly famous and caused them to receive a noble title. But to real nobles, their title wasn't worth anything because commoners couldn't enter the real royal society according to their beliefs. Chapter 105 by Hydesgrain. After eating, Jason went to his room, where he decided to calm himself down by reading through the Weightless Steps manual. In the beginning, he was still thinking about his scarcity of soul energy, but after reading the first few pages of the tiered movement skill in front of him, Jason felt like he was bewitched. To his surprise, the Weightless Steps skill seemed to be a sub-form of the Floating Sky skill Jason had copied. Reading through the manual within a few hours, Jason was certain that he would be able to reach a terrifying speed with this skill, once he reached a certain degree of mastery with it. Maybe he would even be able to use the copied mana circulation with some modification into the Weightless Steps technique, but that had to wait for some time. First, Jason had to practice the original technique, and he would have left to the combat area if his soul energy wasn't close to being completely replenished. Only around 1 hour was left according to his estimation. As such, Jason had to enter the video uploading platform Cellatube to watch some videos. He was slightly embarrassed when he clicked on the videos. If anyone saw him right now, it was very likely that he would be laughed at. He was looking at braiding videos because the Heaven's Hell technique alone couldn't give him the visible support in order to understand how to braid. Only the descriptions alone were way too complex for Jason to understand and comprehend, as his hair was relatively short without him being able to practice braiding. Jason watched multiple videos and even re-watched some to imprint the details into his mind when his soul energy was completely reproduced. Now, his concentration would have to do all the work as Jason steeled his heart before he entered the soul world. Only a short moment later, he stood in front of the stable floating soul world with the soul energy liquid buzzing around vigorously. Taking a deep breath, he divided his soul energy into 5 equal sections. This alone took Jason already 3 minutes to forcefully calm down the vigorous soul energy that buzzed around. Luckily, Jason's mind was already refined and his will strong enough to hold out the strenuous work. Numbering the sections in his mind would help him keep the track of the whole process before he even began. The strand at the leftmost was his number 1 while the one next to it was number 2 until he reached section number 5. Jason placed the soul energy strand 1 over strand 2 and under strand 3, while strand 5 was placed over strand 4 and under strand 1. This was just the first step and Jason was already confused if he did the right thing, but doubting himself would hurt him more than helping himself. Now the soul energy strand 1 was at the sideways angle, near strand 5. After passing strand 5 over strand 4 he passed it under strand 1. Jason smiled lightly, seeing the ground fundament of a braid forming while sweat poured out of his pores. After foolishly smiling, Jason placed strand 2 over strand 3 and under strand 5. It looked like strand 5 was now the second to the left and Jason repeated the same basic process with strand 2, that he used at the beginning of the braiding. He made sure to pass a strand over first and under second, as it was said to be the pattern of the 5-strand braid. After taking a deep breather, Jason felt mentally exhausted. He placed strand 4 over strand 1 and under strand 2 and it is now closest to strand 1 and strand 2. Moving strand 1 to strand 2, Jason made sure to weave strand 4 over and under. Jason continued this pattern until he reached the end of the soul energy strands and he wondered how the hell he finished it without failing a single time. But somehow it worked and Jason smiled bitterly. It was much easier for him to control the single 5-strand after he finished braiding. The soul energy 5-strand helix was roughly 10 centimeters long but at least 3 times thicker compared to the commonly used helix. His mind was racing and he could hear his heart thumping loud, while he forced himself to inject the 5-strand helix into his soul world core. The pain of forcing a thick and more solid soul energy strand into his soul world core was multiple times more painful than the mosquito bite the common helix gave him. It was a shorter process but definitely more painful. A few seconds passed before the searing pain in his mind lessened considerably, while Jason was forced out of the soul world. His whole concentration was used up and Jason was lying in his bed, sweating severely. The only thing he had to find out right now was how long the whole process took him. Gazing at the clock of his holographic screen, around 90 minutes seemed to have passed, which was shorter than he expected for his first try. After getting to know that, Jason couldn't control his body anymore as his mind entered the dream world it longed for. The sun was already up when Jason woke up. Looking at the clock, it was already 9 a.m. It took him quite a while until he remembered what he did the day before at night. Once he remembered, Jason immediately entered his soul world. Sensing the reproduced energy, Jason thought for a second before a smile appeared on his face. One single practice of the Heaven's Hell technique brought him slightly more than 0.1 soul energy. Practicing the technique 3 times a day would give him at least 0.3 soul energy, and this was for the first week. Maybe he could push it up to 0.4 for the second week. If Artemis waited for 2 whole weeks, Jason's soul energy would increase from 11.2 units he had now to 15.9, which was a huge difference. With the amplification from Artemis's evolution, Jason was confident in reaching the needed requirement for a low-awakened beast. Jason could endure the pain from the 5-braided soul energy helix because of the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit's torture. Comparing these pain of both was unnecessary as the result was obvious. Only Jason's concentration would need time to adjust to controlling 5 strands at once, but that would be fine after multiple tries. He was confident in doing so. Now with his completely reproduced soul energy, Jason wanted to practice the 5-strand braided helix once again. Slightly less than 90 minutes passed and Jason was again on his bed without enough strength to stand up. Grumble he was craving food, but he was unable to stand up. It took him almost 20 minutes until he could barely stand. Staggering down, Greg greeted him, while Jason's mind was solely focused on the fridge as he lamented about his empty spatial storage. Opening the fridge, Jason took out a few sausages and Jason sighted some toast next to the fridge and picked the whole package up. Jason scarfed down everything, while Greg looked at him with astonished eyes. "What's wrong with him?" he thought when he remembered that he was about to practice his combat skills. "Hey Jason, let's spar again," Greg asked Jason, without letting him gulp down all the food he prepared. Jason was joyful about his successful second try in practicing one of the most difficult helixes of the Heaven's Hell technique's second level, and it was a feat to be proud of when Greg threw him out of his train of thoughts. Before he could even answer, he was dragged out by Greg, like he himself did only a few days before. It felt like a déjà vu, and Jason's eyes looked longingly at the sausages and toasts that were still on the table, close, yet far away. But there was nothing Jason could do about it, and he was also expectant to test out his newly acquired movement skill. Maybe he could overwhelm Greg with it and win his first fight. But almost immediately after, Jason thought that his mana eyes detected something different on Greg. "Did you break into the 4th adept rank?" Jason asked, slightly hesitating. "What if he doesn't restrict his mana core rank anymore?" Ah. Never mind. Thajason was comfortable with Greg, and he believed his friend wouldn't kill him or heavily injure him. From what Jason knew about Greg, he was rather guys with fair play principles who wanted to improve his technique rather than bullying the weaker opponent. As such, Jason was confident that Greg would at least restrict his mana core strength to the 9th novice rank, or at most the 1st adept rank. "Oh. Haha, yes. Yesterday," he said, not even trying to cover his pride expression. Suddenly the two boys saw Malia absorbing mana in the backyard with her soul beasts around her when Jason's eyes detected yet again something. "Gee Greg. Your sister also broke through. She is already at the 2nd master rank, and only 16 years old. Whoa, her aptitude must be extremely good," Jason praised, and he already forgot that he hadn't praised Greg, who looked at his sister jealousy. He swore to himself that he would be stronger than her in the future. While thinking about the first soul bond that was better than Malia's, laughing inwardly, Greg continued to drag Jason to the combat arena, before he could avert his gaze.